Welcome to the Redacted Culture Cast. Today we are going to start talking about a subject called tactical maturity, which in itself we understand sounds a little bit like an oxymoron because the word tactical is basically the childish version of saying it's cool in gun culture. But instead of just talking about where we want things to go, today my guest is introducing the subject, and after you introduce yourself, so go ahead.
My name's Austin. I'll preface it by saying Forrest and I are good friends. We've been friends for quite a long time. I have a pretty weird background. I think it's pretty unusual, and I think it's kind of why this topic interests me. So I have military and law enforcement background. I am an active duty police officer in Central Texas currently. I work for a couple departments. I have a history in the military, in the Army. I was a cavalry scout, the most hated MOS of all time. And then I was a scout team leader, and then I ended up becoming a long-range reconnaissance team leader for infantry. So I did an infantry scout team leader position as well for a while. Done some time on overseas. Not anything crazy. I'm not like a crazy war vet. Got to experience and rub shoulders a lot with a lot of special operations guys. I have special operations in my family. Lots of friends who are particularly SF and Rangers. I just can't get away from them. And then the other thing is that I did pretty well previously in the Army. I've kind of competed around with different things and been proven to be pretty competitive. In 2018, I was very nearly in the top 50 for best soldier. That isn't meant to be as a brag, but I meant to say that like I have humble origins standing on the shoulders of giants. But I've really been interested in the idea of what does tactical maturity and developing yourself look like if you're not in special operations. If you're not like the tip of the spear, like how do you get as a civilian or as a regular soldier or as, basic police officer, how do you develop that side of you? And I think that's been something I've been very blessed to kind of explore.
So when you say like not, I think I have to start that all over again because you and I have had we got to make sure that we don't like reference conversations that we've had in the past because I think that'll be tricky.
It's gonna be hard for us.
Yeah. We'll make it work. But so. We can certainly say that there's been a long-standing trend within, let's just say, gun culture where like the special operations veteran, myself included, kind of fits the stereotype. Oh, like he's in a movie, he's a white dude with a beard and tattoos and probably has a dog, and then he's angry but has a good heart kind of thing. It's like Rambo 3.0. Yeah, but like when we look at gun culture as a whole, when you're saying, or no, I'm sorry. So you're saying. Let's get into the subject of tactical maturity because I think in some sense we're seeing maybe not the backlash, but sort of the settling of the dust of the rise in special operations where it's turning it less into a hierarchy and more into specializations again.
Yes, very much so. That's exactly kind of both a good and bad thing. And that is the trend. I would agree.
Okay. So when you talk about tactical maturity, like we're talking about tactical military violence-esque, but what how do you define the term and what's it relevant? What's the relevancy to gun culture?
I define tactical maturity as one second. Sorry, clear my throat for a second. I define tactical maturity as a mixture of experience, knowledge, and skill that allows someone to cope with a critical incident, a high stress situation, or an emergency that's occurring. And it requires a lot more than just, I went to the range. It is your decision-making process. It is your ability to control yourself. It's your ability to control others, to observe, to be able to act within your own OODA loop and to be able to act. And that is I think that's kind of the art of emergency situations. And obviously when you get somebody new, whether a new private or they're a rookie cop or something, getting them there is one of the hardest things to do. And a lot of people have different ideas on it. There's a lot of mythos about it. And it's really, if there's a critical incident or there's a real threat going down, how do we go ahead and respond to it? As well as how do we also collapse from it? Because I think part of it too is also like once an incident's done, how do you actually come back from that? So there's a lot to it. It's more than just one thing.
All right. So on its nose, tactical maturity can sound a little bit like what we were calling mindset in 2015, where like
Yeah.
that became the big thing. And as much as we can like kind of laugh at it, we can also laugh at, we can look back at that, like trends and terms used in gun culture, and we can make jokes on it, but like it had its time. So is tactical maturity, how do you differentiate tactical maturity from just mindset? Like, oh, I need to have a winner's mindset or don't quit mindset.
I think the tactical maturity is as a description of a quality of somebody, is kind of the insurance or the quality in someone to make the right decisions. It's very much linked to the decision-making process more than just, oh, they have a mindset. And the mindset is part of it, but the ability to actually operate and make critical decisions and to be part of a team and functioning. And that is, when you see it, you know it. And when you see somebody who doesn't have it, it's very obvious, because then things break down in a team.
Okay, so mindset is a component, as in,
yes,
you have to have the mindset appropriate to the scenario, or be able to develop it, or be able to alternate to the mindset, whether it's going from you could say like your stress levels, like, yellow to white or red to black or whatever it is, or that's a component, but it's. Are you saying that you're referring to it as like a summary of the parts, or it?
I really like Cooper's color code, to be honest. I don't think it's just the Cooper's color code. I think that's an element. Like, so I think that especially the first thing that comes to mind is you'll hear people talking in the military about OODA loop and Cooper's color codes
all the time.
All the time. White, yellow, red, and black, which I think are really important, and you especially hear that in law enforcement. If anyone doesn't know, one thing that's different in law enforcement is that all of the violence is much more personal. So it's very different. It feels different than the military. But that said, being able to be in control or being able to function is one thing. Being able to make the right decisions and to be able to orient on the situation. In the military, we call it developing the situation. That is an art in and of itself. In the Army fundamentals for reconnaissance, because I come from the reconnaissance community, developing the situation rapidly is a really important fundamental, and I think it's definitely the hardest aspect of a reconnaissance mission, because if you're looking at a column of tanks, calling out, I see a column of tanks is not good reconnaissance. What are the tanks doing? Are they preparing for mission? Are they fueling? Are the tankers and the soldiers outside of it performing sustainment activities, or are they doing, are they performing all their combat checks? Totally different scenario. So developing that, knowing able to see it and to be able to explain those things and be able to act on it is what I would say is tactical maturity.
Okay, so I can think of an example of tactical maturity, just by the way you're describing it, is that like somebody who maybe is on the path but hasn't quite achieved that maturity is going to use the phrase OODA loop.
Yes,
they're gonna understand. I'm going to be able to, like, I can conceptualize the idea of a button hook, but somebody who's mature is capable of executing it and knowing when to do it, and then does it, and doesn't need to, like, it's a lot more. Yeah. Okay. And so you can definitely see it in some people. I mean, we can see it, like, we can see examples of it maybe when, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase. Let me ask that actually. Is that something that you see in somebody? Like, can you see examples of people exhibiting tactical maturity, or is it some like ideal that we're just perpetually striving for?
Yes, I do think people do exhibit it. I think it is a quality that there may not be a perfect form of it, but there is a place where you've arrived at as being tactically mature. That's a really good question. I think back to some of the giants I've been able to learn from in the industry, and there definitely are some people that I would say they develop it and they have a good understanding of the situation. They're able to take in new information and to be able to orchestrate a response. And quite a few. I think one of the biggest qualities of it is a lot of people that think that they're very mature or they've seen a lot. Experience is not necessarily tactical maturity. So
okay, it can be a sign of it. It can be an identifier of it, but it's not like the same.
I'd say it's an element of it because you need some experience to be able to have it. But I've known people that have 20 years and they don't make the right decision or they don't see what it is. And there's a specific quality of being able to see a situation, to understand what it is, and to understand what it might be or what it's not. Because situations can turn on a dime. Again, especially going back to law enforcement in particular, it is every time you're on a call, the call is going to come out with a category. Okay, what kind of category of this call is it? But it can turn around real quick. We can reestablish calls, but it's very common, and I see myself do it sometimes. Where okay, this is the way the call is going. I'm already thinking about how to handle it, and then I might be pushing it that way, or I might miss information because we have an idea of what it is in our head already, or what's happened in the past. And one of the biggest things is to be able to put aside previous experiences and understand what a situation might develop into, because every situation is new and it could be something completely different. And I think you see that quite a bit with in law enforcement particularly, but also in the military. In law enforcement particularly, we look at rates officers are killed in. The number one is going to usually be domestic violence calls or family violence calls. Very dangerous. You're going to someone else's house. It's an unknown situation, and we handle them all the time. Some of the safest calls are actually going to be like your SWAT calls, because everybody already assumes that we're at a high level of response, and there's a complacency that's built into it.
And then I'm going to take advantage of your sip here to go. Is it such a thing that we have this idea? I've heard it before where you should always be alert, like the hyper alert, ready all the time kind of thing, right? Where like you approach every call as if it's the worst thing that you could possibly imagine. And I can think back on my experience and say, yeah, that works for like 3 minutes or 3 days, and then
you get exhausted real quick.
Well, so like it's kind of like the question of like, do you lighten the pack or do you get stronger? And sometimes the answer is like, well, both. But,
both, yeah.
But also like, it's really hard to double your weight capacity, your carrying capacity and distance midway through a rotation. Sure. And then you spend the rest of the deployment feeling bad, like you're not good at something. It's not a good idea. Not recommending it. But my point being said is that like, you're also so my point in this really bad analogy is you're withdrawing assumptions and then adding in context as you're going. How does it work? I've never been a cop, so I don't like. I have an idea in my head, and then I want to try to figure out how it applies to like me today.
I think it's similar. So to clarify before I go ahead in this, like it's similar in the military as well. The difference is going to be the team aspect and also the mission set. And I speak to this right now as people who either are in the jobs and haven't had a lot of experiences, or somebody who's a civilian that wants to be that responsibly armed citizen right now, or as we're saying, more than a civilian, a citizen. And I think Ukraine speaks quite a bit to that, because I don't think anybody in Ukraine was ready for what happened. I think that when
all the warnings,
I was. I mean, yeah, but so another example in the military, I remember specifically watching, I think the first big firefight I ever saw in reconnaissance. I was on glass and cameras, and we're sitting around watching, like we're somewhat safely away from this thing. I'm looking at 1,000 meters, but I got cameras that make it seem like I'm from me to you, like on the screen, you're very close. And I saw a bunch of Native Nation conscripts got into a firefight with ISIS one time ago, and they've been there a couple days. And I see ISIS attack a convoy with Dishka, and I saw a guy get cut in half with a machine gun on a Humvee. The Humvee catches on fire. People are running out of it. There's like all this crazy stuff, and there's a bunch of tanks that are sitting around not doing anything. They're not engaging a machine gun position to ISIS, and eventually they do. It took I think like 5 minutes, but 6 people died in a machine gun attack that had main battle tanks in it, and I was like, that is nuts to me. So I was also really surprised.
Wait a minute. You had an unarmored vehicle with a machine gun attack an armored tank-ish unit.
Not even a machine gun position on a road. I didn't describe it well. A machine gun position on a road is attacking a convoy. It's ISIS attacking a convoy, and those guys are brave. Hits a Humvee that's up from the front towards the convoy. It's the second vehicle. Cuts the machine gunner in half. The vehicle catches on fire from Radishka. people are running out. There are people stopping with vehicles getting out. There are main battle tanks that aren't engaging for like minutes, and they cut down 6 people right there, and they were like brand new soldiers, didn't know anything, and it was one of the first things I'd ever seen. It blew my mind. But one of the other things that really blew my mind was that I had several other people with me, and we all have a completely different opinion about that event. Like, you could have several professional soldiers, and we have a completely different take on it. So we were like, oh, it wasn't that big a deal. Some people were like, that was crazy. For me, I thought that spoke to ISIS as being nuts, because like, who attacks a column of tanks with a machine gun? Apparently ISIS. But
well, they did. We kind of fixed we kind of fixed that problem a couple of years ago.
This is like right before ISIS collapsed. It was like a year before.
Yeah, but maybe it hit critical mass.
But yeah, it was just an interesting thing to watch, and I think that was one of several instances that was kind of like a blessing in my life, because I thought about it. I was like, what are the right decisions in this situation? What's actually happening? And I saw some of my friends who my peers, and we had the similar ideas. Some of them had completely different ideas, and it was a completely different. If we were all going to tell a story, we'd have a different summation of what happened, of not what happened, but what the tone of the situation was. And I think that also goes to show that you can have people see the same thing and have different takeaways from it. Because a lot of people want to downplay it as not a big deal. I'm like, okay, fine, but like, I think it was kind of like a legit fight. I mean, that was crazy. People getting cut up, and that's one of the first things to realize if you're going to be a civilian is, or someone young, you want to develop yourself. Someone's experience does not mean that they have the right answer for you. It doesn't mean that they're going to tell you the right things to study. It doesn't mean that you are ill-equipped either to handle something, because you may have the training or you may train yourself correctly. But implementing a plan and an operating system for yourself to function in those kinds of situations is your main goal, I would say. I think it might be the main goal of somebody who's training.
Okay, so let's if you're going to say that something as heavy as that should be your main goal, let's restate that again, because I'm getting this idea, I'm understanding it, and I think about it myself in the own way as like if I'm the meme of like the veteran in his 40-year-old backyard, and the general flies down or the 40-acre backyard, and the general lands in the helicopter's like, we need you, and he goes, I won't help you except for if I get to choose my own team, and you're like, montage, which is hilarious, but if I'm playing the game of selection in the sense of because I'm going to, you'll be in situations where you do take Tim or Frank,
for sure.
You know what I mean? And so like you have to, so oftentimes you have to make that decision, split decision. And so we lean on experience a little heavily, because it's something that I can like immediately rationalize, conceptualize, and like, okay, well, you've done it, so let's go. And that works in these hypothetical scenarios of, well, we need you to build a team of 12 guys to go take down the blah, 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 save the world. But that's not everyday life. And like even Minneapolis was a pretty good example of how things changed, where it's like,
that's exactly right. That's exactly what I'm getting at.
Okay.
That situations can change, that there's an element of kind of understanding the situation, and it's not to knock down the experience of like, I love listening to podcasts with like tier 1 dudes, and it's not to knock down their, but that's a completely specialized, isolated sort of environment, and a tier 1 operator and their experience might not speak to the average person who's learning how to conceal carry and save their family. Now that's not applicable. But understanding situations and the way they change is really important. I think I've been really interested. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I'm interrupting you briefly because I think I want to expand on this as we continue. And I got to write this down so that I don't lose this other note. But go ahead.
Something kind of as an example of this that's kind of that you're getting at right now. Like Minneapolis is a really good example, and understanding and taking in those mindsets, taking in that kind of understanding is really important. But also developing it before you have to face it. I think for people who are developing, I mean, if you are a tier 1 operator, you're going to have a tremendous amount of, what we'd say, tactical maturity already in a lot of ways. You're pretty experienced, but I think that there's an element of like, of how you understand the world around you and being able to adapt to new situations. I think about one thing that I kind of laugh at right now is that there's something in our community right now. Every time you see someone's kit or their home defense loadout or things, there's a glow stick fascination. Like everyone wants to have chem lights for everything. I'm like, okay, what are the chem lights for? And who are like, oh, well, I'm going to get police to go ahead and find where I'm at right now because I'm going to have a trail of chem lights to where I just defended my house. And you're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. That's not the way this works. But it is good to be able to mark something. Being able to mark something within military fashion is really important too. So I think that there's like having the maturity to understand what the situation looks like, I think.
Well, already, because when we say things that are good, the internet doesn't like us because we're not doing whatever. It cut us out. That's the elevator music. Okay, so you were talking about chem lights on kit. Chem lights is an example on explaining tactical maturity as a concept and then how it's implemented. Go.
Yes, I was in. I keep seeing, as an example, I keep seeing videos of people that I think are very good soldiers that are really encouraging everyone putting a whole bunch of chem lights on their kit so they can mark things in case they get in a home defense situation and they, I guess, want to bring the police in, which, guys, it's not really going to be a thing. It's not really going to help too much. Now, you can clear things with chem lights, and I'm not against that. It's just understanding your environment and your operating, your standard operating procedures right now. They might change if you're by yourself. And I think a lot of people bring in previous experiences into places that you might need to have a little bit more of an open mind about. It also, you mentioned hypervigilance. There's an element of being vigilant and also knowing kind of where a healthy medium balance is, so you're not exhausted. Because like long-term operations are a big deal.
Well, and here's one for the bad quote book. There's no longer term operation than life itself. To Valhalla, brother. That's sarcasm. Please don't take that real.
No, and I mean, you can, it's okay to keep expanding your horizons and kind of understand things. I was laughing, it made me think of, things will surprise you, but keeping an open mind is a really important thing. I was laughing the other day. I was at the jail. I was booking in somebody I arrested, and it's a large jail for a large city here in Central Texas. And when I'm there, one of the agencies brings in a Tongo Blast gang member, and he's a pretty hardened gang member. I'm reading his tats. I'm like, okay, I'm getting an idea who this guy is, and we're also in line for the medical line so they can get checked out, so they can go get handed over to jail. Guy gets on the scale, and he's freaking out and yelling about how he's 220 pounds. He's really excited, I guess, that he's weighs that much. Okay, whatever. This other kid walks up. This other kid walks up, and the troopers bring him in, and he looks like he's maybe 18 years old with a bowl cut. You're like, dude, okay, like slightly gangster, but not really. Looks like somebody who's not that big a deal. And I start talking to them more. They're asking, they're talking about my prisoner. Everyone's kind of in this group, and the gang member is there for something like, I think he was carrying a weapon he wasn't supposed to. It was UCW, but that kid was straight up there for murder, like just killed someone with a knife, and you're like, you really, you know? And I mean, it just kind of goes to show you that it's not, keep it open mind. It's not what it always seems. So me and my friend and I were laughing about that because he was there. So,
all right. So to kind of expand or to be articulate in our speech when it comes to something like keeping an open mind, it can come across a little bit as a platitude in the sense of, well, I mean, if you get stuck in a rut, if you get stuck in a rut, you're easy to predict. If you're easy to predict, you're easy to manipulate. If you're easy to manipulate, you're easy to defeat. Which is a really long way.
Precisely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think so. I think I guess as you're talking about this concept of, again, tactical maturity, I've kind of think about how I've seen people like expand and say a skill set, especially. The big one is always like CQB, and like you have the kind of, well, you have the intro and they're stumbling over themselves, and if a guy's first introduction to CQB or whatever tends to be, it's painful at first. It's always painful because it's like, it's so obvious and normal. You're walking in a house with a gun, you know how to shoot, you know how to walk. Can you put those together? And the answer is no. Because you got all these other like factors to consider, and then you get a modicum of being able to be scripted. And so then oftentimes this is where you see that ego kind of flare up. Then the ego gets crushed, and you got to go through, like, let's just say, what are they? I've also seen this kind of this. It's the little hill with the valley, and then the big hill after that thing. It's also the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's like people who can't get past the first hill don't recognize that they don't know anything what they're talking about. And it tends to be an epistemological statement about a person's capability of comprehension, and saying that unfortunately, because of the Dunning-Kruger effect, they will never know that they don't know. And that's just the way it is. And like, that's a hell of a thing to say about somebody. But when it comes to like CQB or a skill set, you hit that ego thing where like you're confident enough doing it that you can perform it in front of somebody. But then you really start learning that like, then you have another layer of knowledge that you have to go through. And so are you saying is tactical maturity the thing that gets you to start that second ascension, or is tactical maturity part of that second ascension? In other words,
I hadn't thought about it in those terms. I'd probably say that it's somebody who's already been over the first hill for sure, and they're up on the second hill, and they're also able to. It might be an individual, so it might not be applicable, but there's also an element of like somebody who's really tactically mature will take other people who aren't there up over that hill with them.
Okay. So especially it's exemplified in leadership, or it's something that identifies a good leader. Like you obviously want a guy to be tactically mature. You want a leader to be tactically mature, yes, but
yes, yeah.
Does that mean that everyone who's tactical? Does that mean that a person who is tactically mature is going to be the leader? Like,
I think they'll naturally stand. I think they'll naturally stand up. I think that it's the whole orders in the absence of orders kind of thing, and I think it's somebody who's bringing order to chaos. And when they by nature of it, if somebody who's tactically mature is going to rise as a leader at some point.
Okay, so an identifier of somebody lacking tactical maturity is when they get into an environment that is off script. They break down. They now lose the whatever like impression of skill set that they had. Breaks down.
Yes, yeah, oh, absolutely. That is a really, really good point, because I have definitely seen myself do that, and I've seen myself conquer that. That's a huge issue. I think that's exactly what I'm speaking to. That there's there's always going to be a wrench in your plans. You know, there's the whole everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face kind of thing. But being able to roll with that is a big deal, or to be able to, I think Pat McNamara says it all the time. He says like fail quickly, and to be able to succeed is like a really big deal. That's an element of it too. And then to know, okay, like we got a problem, like change tactics, change mission, or we got some small issue and fix it real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I started, I was, when I saw myself kind of develop, I worked in a city previously in another department that was pretty big for lots of crime. I've had a few friends that were shot and killed. I found out 2 weeks ago that actually one of my old friends I was a police officer with. He actually had some issues, was dismissed from the police department, but I think for understandable grounds, and then had some issues, and they shot him. They burned him down. They shot him up. They shot him and killed him a few weeks ago, which is crazy because I know both sides who did it, kind of thing. But those are the issues right now that like how do you cope with things that are how do you cope with things that are out of your control, and how do you adapt to those things really quickly, because you're going to have times you're going to fail, and getting over those initial humps to be able to start developing yourself is a really big issue, especially if you're a civilian where you don't have as many opportunities necessarily to develop that. So you have to start looking at other ways to do so. My third day as a police officer, I thought I had 2 days. I was a brand new police officer at the academy. Like I had 2 days, and I thought everything was kind of slow. Nothing's really going on in the city. And then my third day, I had a hostage situation, a high-speed pursuit, and it was crazy. Like it was an absolutely crazy night, and I wasn't ready for it. You know, I ended up getting through it because I had someone there who was tactically mature. He could kind of walk me through, reassure me, and fix me up in the right ways, and guide me. And those things are critical to develop because when you have your first, I mean, you've seen it over down there. If you have your first time you're engaged in something, it's usually probably going to get you amped up, and coming down from that's really hard too.
Yeah, I think I've seen different examples of people performing in a military perspective, or like in a military environment. I've seen different like, you know, I've seen people that would, for lack of better words, be described as somewhat cowardly. I've seen people freeze, but I've also, but generally speaking, I mean, but generally speaking, I was in like, with the exception of moments, you can say that, well, with some confidence, everybody performed well. As in, like everyone kept their head. despite the circumstances and how worse they could have been. Like, it was tough. There was some odd things that happened, but it wasn't like it. But it is exactly the case that it could have gone so much worse had the people who were in their positions not been tactically mature. And this idea of like this maturity is not something I guess what I'm kind of trying to balance out in my thought is how if you're describing it as like a character trait that sets individuals apart, or it's something that can be dispersed across a company or a platoon or a group of people or a bunch of people hanging out.
Years ago, I was reading lots of doctrine, which I'll get to kind of later and stuff like that. I think no one likes to read doctrine and FMs, but you want to make yourself a good warrior. It's actually kind of a good thing to do, unfortunately. At least I understand it. But I read through ADRP, Army Doctrine Reference Publication 1, and it's called Leadership. And I remember reading this line that it said that the greatest determinant of combat power is leadership. And at first I was like, oh my God, roll my eyes. Like, that is some officer in the Pentagon who's just using word masturbation to tell you, like, this is leadership. I'm so important. Later on, I became a leader. And I think I actually look back right now, I'm like, I was mistaken. Like, that is actually a really astute thing.
Okay.
In chaos, like, there's not a lot of time to make decisions. And I think that there's a lot of your opportunities to stand up or make the right decisions, or you're going to have a leader that's going to emerge through that. And I think that's a pretty interesting comment, because can it be dispersed through a platoon? Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
At least
if you have enough.
At least the effects of it will be like it's present. It can be present in that scenario where, like, if the leader lacks tactical maturity, but has by office the authority in the position, then he will not be imparting the maturity of the unit, perhaps, but yet at the same time, people within the order may be of that quality, the right quality of that, like, tactical leadership. And in the event that they have an opportunity to shine, maybe they will. This is probably the only example of you will rise to the occasion. Is like when it comes to training and skill sets, no, you don't rise to the occasion. But when it comes to character, moral character, and tactical maturity, if you have built it in the small things, so it's almost biblical at this point, then it can come out in the large things.
Yes. 100%. I think I heard John Lovell, he talks about this a lot with, like, courage, and I think he does a really good job with it, because he's right that is, like, a big issue. But one of the lines I heard him say one time and was really astute, that he said, it's the big monster in the room that people don't want to tackle, and it's the standing up and the courage. And part of it's confidence. Also, you can have too much courage and do something stupid. We had a pursuit about 2 months ago now at my department with a really bad guy, and he tried to run over an officer. A bunch of other things happened, and we were having a big AAR on it. And I was laughing because they brought us in, and we decided to do it at department. We had the whole sustains and improve. I was like, okay, like, we're really doing the sustain and improve. It was cool though. But I think that one of the things that we noticed was at one point, and that's a really stressful situation, but God bless him. One of the guys was trying to do a couple things at one go, and he's trying to drive a car with one hand, while also he didn't put his flashlight away, so he's got a flashlight in one hand, he held his gun, he's got the radio, and it's just that you can't, there's too much going on. And it's not that he had no courage, it's that there was like, hey, take a step back for 10 seconds, and we'll handle this. But on the flip side of it, not to be too confusing or contradictory, but I think you hear this all the time, is, oh, we got to remain calm. You hear that all the time in the military. You hear it a lot, and especially in law enforcement, like, oh, you must remain calm, you must control yourself. And that's not wrong. That's exactly right. However, I find sometimes people are so obsessed with trying to remain calm that they don't function either. Like, not always true, but some of the people I've seen that, I mean, I've had times where I didn't act as courageous as I should have. I've had times where I was 10 feet tall. It just depends. But I've noticed that a lot of people who make the biggest deal about staying calm usually are not able to function the highest when things are really bad, because they haven't ever practiced themselves outside of that element. And actually, I think that's fitness is a good example of that, because if you work out to a point where the wheels are coming off and you're having trouble focusing, that's a really good simulation of what it's like to be high stress situation, at least for training anyway. So it's a balance. You got to balance it, because I've seen people that like totally different situation that comes to mind. I saw a really crazy flood as a responder. I ended up killing 12 people in my city, and it was pretty nuts. There was a lot of issues, and but we had over a highway. There was like white water over an overpass. Like, it was crazy to watch, and I was following the fire department to go evacuate some place, and they actually hit their brakes, nearly hit the fire apparatus, and we all could have died right there. But I'm sitting there watching this thing, and there's an officer walks up, and she's like, "It's not that bad, like, this isn't, we've had worse before." And the fire engineer's like, "We just beat the known record of flooding by 18 feet an hour ago. Like, what are you talking about?" And she was trying to be so like conservative and, control and calm. And it was like, no, like, this is the real deal. This is a big situation. So I think that being able to understand that is another art, and be able to accept that is another big one.
Yeah, so I think anyone who's been in the military, or especially anyone who's been in like, well, I don't know anyone, but anyone who the Range Battalion knows the kind of thing of like busy work kind of thing, or like,
yeah,
you do not look like you're hasty. You don't look like you're moving in haste, and I can see two edges to this idea as far as like remaining calm. On the one hand, you have your scenario where the person is looking calm, but not addressing the severity of the situation, right? So they're like, "Oh, it's fine, nothing's going on," and you're like, "No, actually," but in reality, something was going on, and that was not the appropriate attitude. So, like, remaining calm from a demeanor standpoint is not overburdening my decision-making matrix or complex or brain, not making the brain so burdened with threat and emergency and signal and noise that you can go, okay, I can assess what's going on and I can make my decision. Whereas too far is, I'm looking calm, I'm acting calm, but I'm not making decisions. I'm just ignoring them. The opposite end of that spectrum, the opposite end of that example is I am looking really busy and running really fast and showing a lot of energy and initiative and literally accomplishing nothing. Like, you ran way, way, way fast because your team leader said, "Go get a 203 blank firing adapter." And you ended up running over
you better not be late.
Yeah, you better not be late, but you ended up like blowing out your knee, getting hepatitis, and then or you're just like, yeah, you know how to make your team leader think that you're working, as opposed to those don't exist. And like, and I shit you not, this is probably the smartest thing that I've ever seen happen. One of the funniest and smartest things that came from a private is one private, no shit, heard another platoon, one of his buddies that he got into battalion with or something, heard about the go find a 203 blank firing adapter and that it didn't exist, so he made one. And so when his team leader yelled at them like, "Oh my god, we're gonna go find me a blank firing adapter for a 203," he just reaches into his locker and hands it to them, and you're like, okay, that kid went okay, I like what you're doing.
That kid, he's a good specialist. I'll tell you that. He's going to be a good specialist, at least.
Yeah. We also then just made him run like a 5 mile for no reason. But,
but yeah, that's it. The 203 blank firing adapter. Go find me a box of grid squares. Give me an exhaust sample.
Yeah. But like
fluid.
You have to show show busy work like you look like you're moving with a sense of purpose. It's like. No, I don't need to do that, sir. I don't need to show you. I do not need to be in a position or sergeant or whatever. Like, this is not advice for any private in the real military. But it's not like I don't need to waste my time and waste your time acting like this is something it's not. Let's focus in on what we're doing. And yeah, sure, games happen and we know. But
I think it's also incumbent on the sergeant in this case. Yeah, we give privates a hard time, and yeah, we all do that. And there's the break-in period, but it's also incumbent on your leadership to recognize who's a good private and who's not, and then also like, okay, that guy needs to be talked to like an adult, that guy doesn't, and that's a whole nother topic for another day. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well,
If someone makes their own 203 blink firing adapter for me, I'm going to be impressed. And I'm going to be like, okay, like maybe you're moving a billet up in my squad or something like that, you know?
here's a lathe. Let's start making stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think there's something to be said there. So kind of drawing it back in and re-zeroing on this concept of tactical maturity. This is not a military show.
Yes.
I'm not in the military anymore. So you and I can use the military examples, just like a tier 1 operator can talk about how his experience and training in this shoot house at this time taught him how to do a thing, but like to the broader culture, we don't have a GWAT going on right now. So we kind of gun culture is by hook or by crook being forced to kind of realign itself with the population. And I can look back, and I was having a conversation with my father, who grew up in another form of Americana gun culture. And he said, when he was young, the dream in his version of gun culture was to have a nice walnut laid stock rifle and go on a big hunt with your buddies, where you go out and camp and you bring whiskey and you tell manly stories. Whereas now we're like AR-15s and plate carriers and night vision, and it's different. So like we can look at the gear and the
CONUS kills.
Ooh.
CONUS kills. That's the dream method. No.
Don't.
Nah, that makes me laugh.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, it's definitely changed. And I think it's changed. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, we didn't mention earlier, Forrest and I have been friends. We both have worked in the industry as well on the civilian side. I was a gunsmith when he actually met me.
Yeah.
And that was also a good experience to kind of see. It's a good experience for me to see other people's experiences and to kind of learn quite a bit. And yeah, the culture right now is definitely shifting in gun culture for a number of reasons. I think the idea, we've talked about this before, between you and me, is that the idea of the citizen is kind of the new thing. And it's a good one, that there is an expectation that we see as the world starting to chaos, that you need to be responsible for your safety and also for your tribe in that sense. And I it's a very good thing. And I'm not certain that it's existed as it does now or at all with any generations that are currently alive. It's a very interesting thing we're seeing right now. And it's the opposite of a lot of like the way the rest of society is going.
Yeah. So I have been reading, The Fourth Turning by the Strauss-Howe generational theory thing. And it's an interesting, it certainly is an interesting book in the sense of, I have to finish it. I'm almost done with the book, but they're very prescriptive in talking about how populations and like the millennials will handle this stress this way, and these people will do this. And I think when they got like the way that they're talking all the way up to like the boomer generation made a lot of sense. And you have a little bit of this, like on the one hand, you have a little bit of like Carl Jung archetypes theory, and then on the other hand, you have a little bit more like historical patterns. And then when he's talking about the nomad generation of the this time to this time will exhibit these traits and prefer these things, and then they will emphasize this contradiction to the artist tribe or the hero generation or the whatever. It's an interesting argument, but when he gets into like kind of their theory seems to be that, well, there's going to be this cycle, and then there's going to be a crisis. And then something's going to emerge from that crisis. And I think a lot of gun culture in the past that we grew up with has been very focused on the crisis. But now we're kind of, I'm curious if that's what you're describing as maturity, because that's what I see, is that like we talk about gun culture more. And part of it is just because I am running a show. So naturally I am regularly having these conversations with people like yourself, but also I think we can say with some sense of certainty is that look how far we've come, and with some optimism say we're going somewhere.
100%.
Okay. So when you talk
100%, like it's a little bit larger scope than I was mentioning, but it's linked in the sense that we're talking about like as a generational thing, that there's the ability, if there is that crisis coming up, that event, whatever it may be. And I think that there's pretty good argument to be made that we probably will experience it. Who are the ones that can lead it? And I think you mentioned the whole generational thing. One thing that's fascinating to me is that you and I talk about millennials, and we are millennials. We get really mad at them and talk about the Generation Z and stuff like that. Who are the most dangerous people on earth right now? They're American. They are American millennials. It's not all of them, but like, who liberated Fallujah and Iraq and Mosul? Like, it wasn't. I mean, maybe a few Gen Xers, but it wasn't baby boomer. It was the millennials. Like all of the most dangerous people right now on the planet are millennials, and it's a wide spectrum.
Well, it was in the last year of being a part of gun culture where I started feeling old. Like not as like not old like I'm the old man in the room, like I need to go retire kind of thing, but like but in the sense of going, I'm not the new guy anymore. Not like in some great revelation, but you're like I like, okay, my attitude is changing and my approach to certain things were like are shifting, and some of that question has been introspection, asking whether or not it's myself or it's gun culture. And I think it's actually, a lot of it is actually, the credit is not myself, it goes to gun culture. But when we go back to this idea, or, I'm sorry, so like I guess I'm stumbling over this way too much. I've noticed that like where I'm at, I'm a little bit more on the older cadre, and the millennial is we are in the dominant years of the millennial generation.
Mm-hmm.
So like when it comes to culture, when it comes to primary workforce, when it comes to expanding or expanding voter block, like we're at the early end of that arc where millennials have cultural dominance, and eventually we'll give that up to the next generation. The prior generation is well into their sunset of cultural dominance. They still have voting power and they still have fiscal power, because they still hold.
They have a lot of fiscal power. That's the one big difference. But yeah,
they do. But like they're no longer at the phase where they're building. The boomers are no longer building gun culture. Is probably what I'm trying to say. Is that like,
yes, 100%.
We can complain about the boomer FUDs, but the boomer FUDs are not driving gun culture anymore. And at some point in time, we started to, but at some point in time, we will continue to stop complaining about the FUDs and start building and start focusing on the next thing. And part of that, that seems like the segue that I can put together to say, you're talking about this idea of the citizen, which when you listen to Isaac Botkin on the Art and War podcast, I think it was him talking about the gun culture 3.0 kind of thing, where it is a lot more focused on. It's no longer like 2.0 being plate carriers and rifles and still very gear focused. 3.0 is much less gear focused, more action focused. Like, we're gonna learn how to do radios, not just have them. We're gonna learn how to do land navigation, not just have a compass. We're gonna learn how to do squad movements and try to figure that stuff out, and then reinvent, because re-understand it.
I think one example of this would be we have a mutual friend, and I was hanging out with you one time, and I was admiring his night vision kit at your place, and it's pretty good. But he mentioned something I thought was really funny, that hopefully not like a jackass, hopefully politely, I kind of mentioned. He's like, oh, this is a force multiplier, and I was like, look, nods are awesome. They're not a force multiplier. Like, you understand that term when you're going to say it right now, because nods don't get the job done. People do. And how units task organize and the assets to you that actually affect your combat power, that is a combat multiplier. And a lot of times, like indirect fires, things that people don't really understand. And it's not to say that the military has everything right, but it was like, he's not wrong. It's a really good tool. But that misses the maturity and the understanding and perspective behind it that makes nods important. Another example on the far side of that would be one of our other mutual friends, not to throw him under the bus much. Ian Strimbeck, who's been on this podcast as well.
Yeah.
Ian's a good dude. I talked to Ian one time, and Ian is a phenomenal shooter. Very experienced. He's got tons of training and everything else there, but he kind of mentions that he doesn't have as much like deployment experience and things as a lot of other people. And neither do I. And I think that's a really good point. But the one thing that you realize is that he's absolutely somebody I've known on my team. He's very, very capable, and a lot of it, it's not, you don't make it and be like, okay, like I'm not green anymore, not because of some experience or something, or like your first firefight. It's not really. It's really comes like, when do you take it seriously? I think when you take things seriously and you start making your life reflect the things in the small, like you said, like reflect the small things that make it so that when it happens, you rise to the occasion. And it starts before an experience. Some people it is in the experience, but a lot of times it's really just what you do on a daily basis to make it serious and take it seriously.
Okay, so I think I have to counter that though. I think
Okay, that's fine.
I have to counter that in one sense. Like I think part of maturity is also knowing what not to take seriously and being able to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's just simply the side of like it comes back down to like the drama thing. Like, so I know some people who take drama very seriously, and it's like and the challenge is like so long as you take it seriously, it has control over you. And maybe this is and to be clear, like, okay, so we've just had 4 statements right now. We talked about all referencing people who, like, we got the nods guy, and then we've got Ian, and then we've got this other thing, and we're all getting really, really, really kind of ambiguous because we want to narrowly walk that line between being critical and observing our interactions with people, but also like being respectful. And this is one thing that I will say it and be done with it. I am very thankful that for the majority, gun culture is getting much more is able to take criticism and focus on this is the objective. Like the internet age of the gun culture has definitely grown up. Like if you're if you're getting bent out of shape because somebody made a criticism about you, like just quit, man. Like this, it's not that there are trolls, sure, but we'll be fine. We'll make it through this. Like we'll it's out of respect. We think we admire the growth, and I look at people and what they've accomplished, and saying like, I can critique you and still respect you, dude. I don't critique people who I don't like. Like I would never challenge your idea if I thought you were stupid. So
you don't punch down.
Well, I do punch down. They just usually don't see it. I build a massively successful sock puppet account that is, and then have that sock puppet account attack them. I don't.
Little voodoo doll. No.
I actually just mail voodoo dolls to their house.
No, I do think that you do see that with a lot of the way that I like what you said, going back to that, the internet gun culture has grown up. Mm-hmm. And that's, I can remember a couple of years ago that what was it we were arguing about? I think with one of the biggest debates we remember, it was like the forward assist, like should you have it or not? And sure. And I think Forgotten Weapons made a really good case. And it's funny for me coming from gunsmiths. All the gunsmiths I know were like, no, you shouldn't have it. And I don't really care one way or the other. I'm not like super strong in it, but that was an example of something that people got really wrapped around the axle about. And everyone had to say, like, I did this and I was a gunner's mate and I did this other thing in the Navy, and therefore I know you need forward assist because it's so dirty out there. And I'm like, okay, whatever, dude. Like, calm down, hero. But at the flip side of it, now we're debating things like Boundary 1 Alpha. Like, how do you react to contact? It's really changing quite a bit in a good way. And people are changing what we're talking about, mm-hmm. Like what's patrolling look like and what is infrared camouflage, like things that matter. And my dad, and it's really interesting to me that it really makes me think of, I know a lot of warriors, like, as you know, my family, I have a lot of military, but I know a lot of people there. I have a couple in my family that really stand out for their experience, and a lot of things they, raising me, were talking about seemed like they were really important growing up. And then it changed in our generation in the military, because we were doing things like, okay, like everything is we're holding ground and building hearts and minds, and we're doing raids every night, which is totally dope. Not that it's a bad thing, but some of the things they're saying now are starting to come back around that have been lost and forgotten, and it's starting to sound like that generation. Wasn't that they were necessarily better warriors, but they had a good perspective that we didn't have, and we're finally maturing into that same perspective, which I think is really cool to see. We have more knowledge, but and definitely more skill.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the global war on terror's structure of the GWAT structure of like having a fob that's okay, like not a fob, having like Kandahar, which is huge, mm-hmm. this or Kabul, or having like this big base where you operate out of and having the quick strike capability of like, okay, well, we're going to fly 75 miles south and then we're going to go hit this dude in his house and then we're going to get back on the bird and go home. Like where you have this opportunity of like kind of operation rest in theory. And it's not always
war tourism.
Well, war tourism, like, or even just like we had I'm going to say it, we had the luxury of saying, oh, well, after about 115 days, the operational capacity of the individual starts descending rapidly. So for all special operations guys, you're only going to be there for 119 days, and then we're going to send you home. Because like that's what it was told to. That was what was told to me in Ranger Battalion. The luxury of it was that I had 3.5 month deployments, but you know, I could go there's a certain luxuriness to it. In sense where it's like I wasn't over there for 3 years consecutively.
Yeah,
taking ground.
And what that does to you.
Mm-hmm. But
on the flip side of it, though, the one thing it really makes me think of is I actually when I deployed with a couple of dudes, and I got traded between 2 platoons. And one of the platoons I was in had a scout who was from he was actually in Cop Keating, which was it was we've had 2 Medal of Honor actions that happened there. It was a really big deal. They got shot at every day. It was the most dangerous cop in Afghanistan for a long time.
This is like Restrepo kind of thing, like Cop Keating.
It was not Restrepo, but it was similar. It was nearby. It was actually at the bottom of a valley nearby in. What was the province of Western Afghanistan? Anyway, I'm not as familiar, but he was there at Cop Keating, which was like the most dangerous of all the places in Afghanistan.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I'm going to interrupt you real quick. It's like that is somewhat of an identifier of like of what the last couple of years, the last 20 years of military conflict has produced. Is like, yeah, dude, I don't know everything about Afghanistan. I know that the mountain. You might know one area intimately. But like even then, it's interesting to see how like so many little events happen that it's I don't know I don't know everything that happened everywhere, which sounds kind of passé, but it's also like a lot has happened, and a lot of that was like conflicts here and there, and so
there was a lot of those issues. I was never actually deployed to Afghanistan. I don't know Afghanistan very well. I don't know it from like. Listening to it, but I don't know. But anyway, but Cop Keating was like the most dangerous, and so they got firefights every day. And he's a decent NCO, but he's not somebody that I would really say was like the guy that I think I'd want as a tactically mature leader. He wasn't necessarily somebody I want to follow in that sense, and it's not anything personal. It just wasn't that guy. It wasn't important to him. On the flip side of it, I got traded to a different squad leader, and he was pretty well developed in the infantry reconnaissance community. Did lots of stuff. Actually ended up teaching Pathfinder school for a while. And that man was awesome. I mean, like he had been in firefights and everything else. He had a lot of experience, but just his mindset, the way that he relayed information, his calm, collective demeanor, the way that he dealt with his guys, the way he set things up, and the way that he was just like, "Oh yeah, man, we're going to go over here and build this urban hide, and it's going to be really dope." And he'll show you how to do it in an expert way. That guy was probably the best military boss I ever had. Easily the best squad leader ever. And technically less experience in fights, definitely a better, more tactically mature individual. And I learned a lot from him. And I think that it's not just experience. It's an understanding,
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So let's use that as the turning point between talking about very military-esque environments to something that you brought up earlier, which was I can't remember. Did you say the skill sets of the non-special operator or something like that? Like whether it's the citizen, whether it's the individual, whether it's what is this idea that you're talking about?
The idea that you are now a citizen, or you've just graduated from a police academy, you're someone who wants to defend your neighborhood or something like that. Like, what are the things you need to be able to hold the ground when the Mongol horde comes and invades? And I mean, and you might not get the chance to develop it over in Afghanistan before that. That's kind of for the citizen. for the person who's responsibly armed every day, who's carrying EDC. What does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
Because I wish someone would have explained that to me earlier. Because I spent so much time wasted pursuing the wrong things, and everyone's going to do that to some extent.
Yeah, myself included.
But not everyone's going to be a Navy SEAL, and so we don't always have the people to listen to. And also going to, I've been in shooting companies where I worked with Navy SEALs and I worked with Green Berets. Like, might not be the best person to teach you about concealed carry.
So a non-hierarchical,
really
so like a non-hierarchical approach to a skill set of this type. Let's step back. What tactics do you choose? Well, that is determined by your mission. So we go mission, skill set, gear, or mission, tactics, gear. And so this is the tactics skill set portion that helps inform your gear, and but it's dependent on having a mission in essence. And so you have the mission. Go ahead.
Let me ask you this real quick. Let me ask you this real quick. Kind of as like I'll segue into this. When you were in Minneapolis, when the riots were breaking out, who were the most effective and most in control of that chaos? Like who could operate the best in that environment, which is a semi-permissive environment, I guess you could say, depending on where you were in the riots. Like who did the best during that time?
I can think of it. I need a minute because I want to answer that on at least two levels. I want to answer that on because we saw two things in Minneapolis. We saw three things, but the two things that are relevant to that question are you had, let's just call it the civilian response, or the citizen response. I got to write this down because I haven't thought citizen response. I have never thought about that question actually. But you have the citizen response, and then you have what I'm going to call the I want to call it like contractor, like. So
the hired gun response.
The hired gun response. Yeah, that's hired gun. That's and the reason why I'm saying that is because they're very different. Like what you saw not simultaneous, but as like over the last decade, over the last 7 years, the potency of the kind of contracting life overseas has declined. The money has dried up. The operations are going down. The people are needed or less. It's been more isolated, whatever. So, and I think that's just been like the general my general motif that I've heard from people and that I've known from that arena is that like over the last, and then of course with the collapse of Afghanistan, you're not now you have a whole bunch of unemployed dudes, but that happened in 2021, not in 2020. Mm-hmm. So. The hired gun level is a little bit is one answer, but that is very quickly going to fall into the same category of like military maturity, like which kind of people were able to adapt to the environment, who blew out their spine because they were so stressed, who were able to like, could you work with people in different environments, interact with police, interact whatever, were you able to be there on time, were you sober, were you these kind of issues like these
yes.
Whereas on the citizen side, the biggest responses that I saw were, maybe I'll put it this way. Suddenly a lot of people really, really cared about what you did and who you were. And like, oh man, people wanted to buy plates and the gun stores were empty and they wanted to buy guns and people started. So like you saw some people develop communications platforms and figure out who to talk to, and they built a network. And some people started cutting chest plates out of steel, like they were going to wear it as like a plate carrier. And you're like, I mean, that's some of the responses that I saw. I saw a lot of people freak out. I saw a lot of people leave. Actually, quite a few people just left the city. Anytime a riot would happen, they'd go up to grandma's house. But then there were some people who got a hold of each other, and they knew who was, they figured out where everybody lived, and they had, and they connected all of their friends together so that everyone could talk to each other, and then they had the ways to communicate, and then they hunkered down. And when someone needed something, they brought them eggs. And when this happened, it was very quiet, and no one saw a damn thing. But as in, like, it was never on the television. But I'm trying to rule out, I guess. I need another minute to think about this question. So can you ask the question again? Because I feel like I'm not answering it well. I can feel myself trying to put together the words. And
anybody listening is going to understand. It's not a question that we discussed beforehand, because it's kind of throwing you off. And you actually answered what I kind of expected in a way. The question is, during the riots and all the chaos, who operated and functioned and was able to thrive the best? And it's like you said, it's not monolithic. There's different types of elements there. The one thing you did hit on that I think is interesting is that the ones who were actually hired to be able to operate in the situation, particularly on the military side, did the best. And it's like, okay, so that means that there's something. It's one thing to look at training. So, sorry, I don't recall his name. You had someone on a couple weeks ago that I watched. I'm trying to think which podcast that was. One of the things that he mentioned was, like, it seems like sometimes, very good podcast, but it seems like sometimes people always want to have answers that are immediately applicable. I've seen this in the gun community where we're going to train a new shooter. They're like, okay, we'll use fundamentals because everyone wants to see things that you get results for your money. It's like, yeah, sometimes you do want those skills, but there's something bigger. And military training isn't just, it's not very formalized. Anybody who's not in the military should understand this. Like, most military training is BS. Like, it is like, it's just like, okay, fine. Like, just pretend this happens, and then we got to react to this one other thing here. And it gets chaotic.
Yeah, like what is the idea of, like, tactical training? Like, we have this idea in pop culture that you go into tactical training as, like, a normie, and then you come out as a freaking ninja. You know what I mean?
Like, you went in as nothing, and you came out as Keanu Reeves, as John Wick. Just exactly.
You know how to kill me in, like, 17 different ways. It's like, well, bro, there's like 3. It's no blood to brain, no oxygen to. Actually, there's 1. No oxygen to brain. You know what I mean? But the flip side of it, though, I think that there is something to be said of people in that kind of chaotic environment. There has to be some sort of trained stress response that keeps you under control and lets you be able to make your own goals and not be freaking out because you're in an environment you've never been in before. And that is also not in and of itself tactical maturity, but it's an element. It's an element of being able to be, okay, the situation's going down, and what it's first off, the ability to realize no one's coming. It's up to us. That's a really big one. And then 2, what are we going to do? Like, we're under attack or we're under siege. What are we willing to do now? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you might have to leave. But also sometimes it might be like, no, I'm not willing to leave, or I'm not willing. And that's the hardest thing to instill and teach to somebody else. It is very difficult. I think I can answer your question now. I think I can answer your question of, like, how did I see, what were the different types of reactions that we saw, and how did people sort of handle the riots? And I'll use, and these are all the non, like, military contractor sides. This is all, like, the civilian side. I saw the carnival goer. So the carnival goer would be something's happening, I'm going to go hang out. And they just
get your cameras out.
I'm saying, like, whatever's happening, whatever anyone else is doing, I'm doing it too. So if they're throwing bricks, I'm throwing bricks. If they're throwing bricks, I'm throwing bricks. If they're looting grocery stores, I'm getting a monster. If whatever's happening, it's a little bit of, like, the madness of crowds, where like, I'm not saying that they're brainless, mindless zombies. I'm saying that when it came to the high stress environment, they just kind of were carried along by the event. And then I saw, and by the way, I want to be very clear in this, that does not absolve them of responsibility for their actions. Just because you're getting pulled along by the event doesn't mean that you can't be held responsible for what you do during those things. And so, like, fine. But the second thing that I saw was kind of like, we'll call it the tourist. But instead of it being the tourist of like, oh, I came from Chicago to participate in this, it was like the Boogaloo Boys. Oh, the things are happening. And like, and this is weird because we started seeing these articles pop up about like Boogaloo Boys in Minnesota. And they were exactly the people that you would think they would be. Like this was 2020. The Boogaloo joke had started like 6 months prior. This was in the build up to that, because that was that same year that we had that Virginia rally, the big gun rights Virginia rally. And so like this was in that Virginia rally was kind of like, that was probably peak Boogaloo joke. But then what happened in Minnesota with the what people refer to as the Boogaloo Boys, where you know exactly who I'm talking to. They saw the joke and they tried to make it real. And they bought so much into the humor of the Boogaloo that like they took it on as a personality. And so when and I'm saying it this way, I wouldn't consider them like a threat in the sense of like, oh, they're going to go operatingly, but they were citizens who had some sense of like preparedness and the vehicles and the gears and the thoughts. But like what they ended up doing is they just ended up going to jail because they set out to like, I don't know what they set out to do. Like,
I don't think they knew themselves what I think that's probably the point. They didn't know what they set out to do themselves. And I think that you get captured in something. You get captured up in an idea.
Well, case in point,
you don't have the ability to orient to what's going on in the world around you. You know?
Well, case in point, when they first announced their existence and the Boogaloo Boys were coming down into Minneapolis, everybody thought they were going to do something like be the Proud Boys but with guns, and they were going to go be like this weird militia thing, except for not a militia, just a bunch of dudes, you know, whatever. And like I said, like the key element of like, dude, I laugh at Boogaloo jokes. They're hilarious, but like, don't make it your literal identity. And so what happened was they ended up going there, and for the first spark of like, oh no, is Cletus going to let off his basement full auto in downtown Minneapolis? And what they ended up doing was joining with the enemy and then getting arrested.
Yep.
Like they just kind of like took the rote libertarian route and said down with government, rah, and ended up going to jail. Some of them did. Not saying that it was like an evaluative of their crimes, because I'm not making that point, but I'm making the statement of like, in whatever you were doing, you accomplished nothing now, and you gave you gave people who don't like your human right to own a firearm one more piece of ammunition to use against you, because you're easily carried away by the emotion of the moment. So that's the second one. So the first one is, the first one is like the carnival goer. It's boring. We're on lockdowns. Oh, there's a block party going on. Oh, they're throwing bricks. Oh, they're throwing Molotovs, whatever. The second one was the Boogaloo Boy. The third one was the panic mode, which I saw mostly in urban, not suburban, urban families. Not families, urban, like young parents and singles and stuff like that, of like this, oh my God, I have to go and get like all of the things now. One of them, an example of one being more affluent now, like, and the key example of all these people is that while they knew what was happening in their immediate area because they saw it, they were essentially knee-jerk reacting into trying to become a fortress today. And it's like, you have, and that was the challenge. It was like, and the issue that I ran into it is that, for a lack of better words, it's too late for you, dude, because you can't just buy plates and put it on, kind of thing. But if and I think, even if they could have, it wouldn't have been the thing that I would have advised for them, because it's like, you don't have, like, I wouldn't, and so that's the third one, is this like panic reaction mode. It's like, oh my God, I have an event in front of me that allows me to like perfectly justify the thing that I wanted to buy, and now I don't have to argue with my wife about going and buying the thing. Now I'm just going to go to the gun store, and then they're finding out that, oh, the laws that you have been voting for in this state are ruining your opportunity to defend yourself. Oh, you're actually, and so like this is kind of like your casual CNN enjoyer, which is not a good term. And then the last thing that we saw was a lot of people just kind of gone, all right, here it is. We got food in the kitchen. We got family home. We're like, this is bad. What's going on? You know, like, and they reacted a lot more calmly because they called their friends and they held each other accountable when somebody would see something say on Twitter and like lose their mind about it and be like, no. They're pulling each other back from the brink. And so that was the best reaction I saw.
I had an idea about that, and someone in Oral Board a couple years ago asked me off the cuff, how do you define crisis? I might not be 100% on it, but I stopped and took a minute to think about it, and I think the answer that I gave was crisis occurs when somebody is in a situation and they can't see the outside of it, or when this thing's going to end. They don't see another state of being on the other side of whatever event they're dealing with. It doesn't mean they stay there, but I think that that's like a really big one. Do you think that might have been part of the case with people right now who are freaking out, that they realized that they weren't ready for it, but they also couldn't think ahead to when this thing was going to end or die down?
A crisis being such that it captures all of your attention, that you're incapable of seeing outside of it or beyond the environment. It dictates. Yeah. It is literally dominating your will.
It's a mode. It's a mode of emergency that is so focused on the moment that you lack the skills to think about the future after it at some point. Maybe that's a bad definition, but that's kind of an idea that I've been working on, and I think it reflects a lot of the things I've seen.
Yeah, I think we often define a poor reaction to a crisis when the person shuts down, or just we, through the benefit of hindsight, look at what they've done and they're just frenetic and chaotic, or make it worse, right? But
100%.
But we're still like. So we want, when you're looking at what does a skill set look like for a citizen and a responder and an individual, is the crisis in mind? Is the crisis in mind how you define the objective? Like, the advantage that the military has is that it should, and it doesn't do this, and we suffer things like Afghanistan when we don't, but it can say, this is our mission, this is when it's accomplished, let's figure out how to accomplish it. Whereas, like, I'm in my 30s, it's safe to assume that I have about 50 years of life ahead of me, give or take 10 years, and like a mission, I'm going to have multiple missions over that time: raising children, building a home, running a business, having another conversation. And when it comes to like gun culture, that is the blessing and the curse of where we're at. We're not distracted as much by ooh shiny, but now we have to face the hard question that was distracting us from. And so,
yes,
crisis can be another ooh shiny. Oh, we have to be ready for the crisis, and that's where I get the apocalypticism. That's a word that I invented today. Maybe, probably not. That apocalyptic kind of approach to like the prepper. This is a caricature. If you're offended, sorry, but like the caricature of the prepper is that he builds his entire life's worth, value, goals, obsession into surviving the EMP thing or whatever, right? And though he may be alive, whatever it is that he's pursuing is some sort of vegetative state inside an underground bunker. Or like the criticism that we have against like the 1980s, 1990s prepper caricature is that like I can distract myself from having a sense of meaning by buying and chasing after the ooh shiny. I can also distract myself by pursuing a sense of meaning and purpose and objective by delving into apocalypse, the like obsessing about the apocalypse. But both of those fall short of what we're talking about.
100%.
And gun culture is moving away from ooh shiny apocalypsism. And now we have to deal with the hard question. And some of the ways that I think you've done this is you started asking, what does EDC, what does gun culture citizen, what does it mean to be an American citizen is how I thought that's what you were going to say. Like, what does it mean to be an American citizen?
Yes, more than a civilian, you're a responsible member of your society, and there's a level of duty that goes along with that. Yes, yeah. I think there's no right one answer as far as what kind of gets you there. Some people have it. Some people are just born with it. I've met people that like they're born with it. And they're just cool. They can cover it no matter what. I wish I was that way. I wasn't. I had to learn it. I've met people right now who had all kinds of training and they still didn't overcome it very well, or they just had some kind of block. And I think it has to do with like an awareness. I was very interested to find out that the Army ended up going to the Marine Corps in the 60s to learn why the Marines functioned downrange a lot better. And the reason that drill sergeants today wear the campaign covers, they got it from the Marines. The campaign cover from the Marines was all the way back from the early 1900s when the old Marines wore the campaign cover and new Marines didn't have it. But the Marine Corps didn't understand why their drill instructors were able to produce people that functioned in combat. And if you read On Killing, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, which is a pretty big book, they explore this idea quite a bit. And one of the things they said is, we don't know why, but making people be put in an environment where they can't be right, they can't succeed over small things, created the ability to function when they know that there's probably some failure or some kind of fear. That doesn't mean that's not the only place to get it, and that also means if you've been through it, doesn't mean that you're going to be the best at it. But I'm like, that's an interesting, and I've been through Marine Corps boot camp and I've been through OSIT, and I got hurt in the Marines, and I think something that was very interesting to me was to kind of like look at that and like, why do we do those things? And it's not the only way, but for me, I think that's been the determinant when you have crazy events and things you couldn't imagine, and being able to hold back for a second. And sometimes it's also things you can imagine and being able to handle it better, like just clearing a house, or you know, someone that someone in an environment that's outside of what your normal is. Yeah.
It's a hard question, and I'm not saying that I have the answer, but I think I am encouraged by the willingness of gun culture to seek after answering that question. Like I recognize that we're part of it and we're pushing it right now, but we're good. We're in a good place. So let's cut right into the meat and potatoes of what are the skill sets that you think are necessary for the citizen. And this isn't like the NRA's responsible citizen. It's like a citizen. Like,
exactly.
These are good things to pursue.
Yeah. And I thought about this a lot and was able to write down kind of my thoughts on it. For anybody who's trying to learn this right now, one I would say is learn the basics well. And that's very broad, but it is a really important thing. It's not just, I go to the range and I shoot my gun. It's not just, I can do malfunction, I can clear my malfunction very well. It's how do you move? How do you keep your gun with you? How do you do it without being flashy necessarily? Or sometimes there's a time for a place to be flashy, if you ask me. It's rare, but it's there. It's knowing where things are in your city, knowing what resources are what, and how to be able to gather what you need and be able to, if you have a plan, or even better is if you want to be able to make a plan, what are the logistics and the elements that go into that plan to be able to accomplish it and execute it? Because that's a really hard thing. So learn the basics well. You'll spend a whole lifetime and never get all of them. Second one, I'd say, it's the nerdiest one on this list, but I'd say read some doctrine. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but just have a general understanding that you have unlimited resources at your fingertips of people who have been through some crazy events and learned some hard things. And sometimes learning the basics is downstream of doctrine. Doesn't mean we have to go with it, but it'll help you quite a bit if you have no experience or understanding. at least have a working understanding of what people do when there is no law, or you're in a situation where we're out there in the wild. That goes for cops too. I think cops should probably get a hold of that. I could go to Ed Calderon on that, and he's got some interesting thoughts that have been on mine lately, but I'll leave it for now. Third one, really important, talk to strangers. This is a big one. People don't know how to talk to each other, and we also are in a culture that increasingly doesn't communicate. Learn how to have a conversation with somebody random, someone that you got on the street, or somebody who's having an issue. Learn how to talk to somebody who's homeless, or to be able to. I remember I called you one time, and you were doing something in Minneapolis that I'll leave undisclosed, but someone walked by and I heard you say, "Hey, what's going on?" And you talked to him, and it was a group of Antifa that was on the phone. I just heard you like engage in conversation and kind of disarming with some words. That's a huge deal. That's a very rare skill. A lot of people can't do that. So talk to strangers. Fourth, I would say, is expect a fight and rehearse it in your mind. It doesn't mean that you're looking for a fight, but expect when you go out when you go outside today, that there's going to be something crazy. You're going to see, like, how many videos are we seeing now on Instagram on a whole bunch of pages? I think Bladecraft Method's a really good example where, man, there's like people just watching with cell phones and they see somebody kill somebody else with a knife or a shovel or something crazy that happens on the street, and nobody helps anybody else out. It's all too common right now. And it's part of it is you have to rehearse in your mind and expect, hey, something's going to happen today. And that also means you're better dressed to be able to function in that situation. Don't wear flip-flops outside. Don't have your kit or your EDC in a way that on your belt that's you can't run with it. I mean, you got to be able to function. You got to have your stuff ready to go and expect that today you're going to need it. Now you might not. Don't go looking for it, but it'll be much easier for you if you get into a situation if you were expecting it. That's a big portion of it. Also, press check. I would say,
what was the best marketing campaign for getting people to press check that has ever worked? Like, I remember when people were talking about it, like, it's a big deal, you got to press check in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what's then the most successful thing for like getting people to press check their guns?
I actually wouldn't know.
Call of Duty.
Yeah, that's a good point, because Call of Duty, they have like the guitar goes off and you got your press check on your gun. Yeah.
Yep. The starting animation of every firearm is.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It looks cool anyway, guys. Just do it. But no, I actually one of the biggest influencers in my life was I had a sergeant major who ended up kind of like really mentoring me, and he was a legend from 5th Group. He was SWAT in Houston, over in Houston, the county for Houston and Harris, and the guy was just 10 feet tall. And one of the things he always say is, you better know the condition of your firearm at all times. Like, know it. And it seems like a platitude, but it was like a big deal to kind of bring people there. That guy was so cool.
I have
talk to him a bit.
Yeah, I have over the years, it has become a little bit more relevant of like balancing the condition of my firearm. Like, I know, like, for example, we just drove across the country. We went from hot country to cold country, back to hot country. And when I got to cold country, I realized that like I had shot my gun suppressed without like cleaning it. And for a minute I was like, I don't know how my rifle is going to perform in the cold right now. And that was the simple issue is that the simple nature of it was, for a window of time, I was unsure of how my tool would perform. Mm-hmm. You can turn that into an innuendo. There you go. Clip it. But for a window of time, I was like, I should know this, but I don't. I really hope I don't ever have to use it. I didn't think I was going to have to pull out my AR and like go to work. You know, whatever that guy.
But I mean, it's a real thing. Like what tools do I have in resources and tools do I have at my disposal, and am I ready to use them? Yeah.
Yeah, because I've never been the like you always clean your gun 17 times a week guy. Like I've never been that guy. Like,
don't be that guy.
But I have been the on the side of like. But that was a moment where I was like, I'm out of line. I had time to clean it before I left. I should have just greased it up or oiled it up and gone, but now it's problem solved, right? And it's interesting. Like, it's not like paranoia. It's just like, oh yeah, my what is the condition of my handgun?
Yeah, like even if you left it in one way, like just know it.
Yeah.
Number five, I would say, love your tribe. And ideally, it could be other people too, but like you have people around you, it's your family, it's your friends, it's people that you influence you. Like, love your tribe. And what I mean by that is like you are not going to be as efficient if you are trying to lone wolf this thing or trying. And one of the things you and I have seen is like some of the worst guys on a team or the worst guys in an environment, or even if it's just somebody who's a hired gun in Minneapolis, is somebody who's trying too hard to be too tough. It's like, come on, dude. Like, it's a problem. It gets in the way. And it's not just that they're trying to be too tough. The answer is they're not grounded. That their philosophy is not really grounded in something that's real. Love your tribe. Love the people you're doing this for, and the people that you're working with. Be a good dude. Be someone that loves the people around you and that is worthy of the same love. And that's a really important calling that's going to be an element of this. Number 6, I'd say, is expect. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you just it's I find it intriguing that you include it as a skill set.
Yeah, it's a skill. It's learned. It takes a long time, and it's something. If you don't go out to learn it, you might not ever learn it. Maybe you do already have that and stuff. Maybe you have to develop a little bit of backbone. You already have this kind of, but you need to have both sides. It's important as a warrior. I'd say number 6, expect tomorrow to be different, to look different, at least anyway. It's. I think that might be the hardest one, is people think that tomorrow is going to be the same as today. It's not the case. You don't know. We're not guaranteed what's going to be tomorrow. And I mean, you saw, it's funny now. I was like, oh man, it's January 2023. Like, it still hasn't even been a full year since there's been a war in Ukraine. And it's something we take for granted now. Oh yeah, there's that war. And we get all the videos from it and all the crazy stuff. It's like, oh, that's a pretty recent thing. Expect tomorrow to look different. Don't expect it to be the same today. I would say skills, not resume. That's a big one. This is a little bit more people in the industry, but don't do something to build your resume. I see this a lot in law enforcement, somewhat in the military too. Just because you have the resume that says you're the subject matter expert on something does not mean you're the SME. Like, build the skills. Don't go after the resume. The resume comes later. And when you're ready for it, someone's going to ask you to do it. Number 8, I'd say, is stage your gear and your kit. Small thing, but really practical and important. Stage your stuff. Example for this, I was issued Narcan, and I was like, man, this is really cool that I've got a whole kit here with like a bunch of suits to be able to look for, like hazmat stuff. But the actual Narcan itself is like down on the bottom of this box, this small little tough box they gave me. I'm not gonna be able to find it. If I need it, I need that thing immediately. So I tape it to the inside of the lid so that I open it up and this was ready to go. Because I'm not gonna be able to function if I get exposed to fentanyl. You see it in tourniquets, like how you set your tourniquet on your belt. Everyone's got a tourniquet on their belt now. Very few of them are actually set up right to be able to immediately pull them out and use that thing. Okay. It's got to be staged right.
So here's a moment where I can see a little bit. I can see space for contention. Mm-hmm. You're saying that we need to stage our gear and our kit, and I'm not arguing with you there.
Yeah.
But then, now, how is this going to apply when you're going to have an issue between people fighting over what is the appropriate way to stage gear in your kit? The case in point example is that like everyone knows that you shouldn't be zip tying your tourniquet to your body, mm-hmm. right? But when you see it happen so many times where people don't have them staged properly.
Yes.
Like how do you have you built into the cake a resolution for that conflict, or is that just kind of the way of things? You got to be mature and work your way through it.
A little bit of both, because there's more than one way to skin a cat. This is actually one place I would say, you know what, if you're talking about kit on your body, I would look to special forces and special operations, particularly special forces. They're really good at this. Other things are understanding what's important to get to fast and what's not. One example of this, I think, is like magazines. Like, you don't need every magazine on you to be ready to speed load, but you need a couple of them for sure. You need to know, understanding your kit. How do you set it up so you can go prone or look around a corner or use cover correctly? There's little things like that. I mean, I'm thinking very, very broadly, but I have definitely seen times when there was an emergency, particularly like in medical and life-saving stuff, when something wasn't set up right and we weren't ready to go. I had a time particularly where I had to put a tourniquet on someone who was shot in the line of duty. I didn't have my shears on me. I didn't do it wrong. I didn't do anything wrong, but he was shot multiple times. I missed several gunshot wounds. He bled out on me. And it was like, I could have probably figured out a little more. Even though we were securing the scene and I wasn't the medical designated professional, I probably could have figured out a little better if I would have cut his clothing off. It's a hard lesson to learn. It's something I think about quite a bit. So have shears, like get ready to go with them. And really look at things in the way that we set them up so that they're quick use. And that'll tie into one of my other rules in a minute, but know what you have to get too fast. Some things you don't have to get too fast. In my kit, I keep a survival mirror. I don't have a survival mirror ready to go. It's like an item that's on my kit, but I'm not going to need it if it's like a buzzsaw is another example. I got like Chemline buzzsaws. It's not an item I need immediately. I'm not going to keep it in a place where I have to draw it instantly, that kind of thing. So stage it as you need it. Moving down the list, I think the next one I would say is get fit. Get jacked, get ripped, get fit. That one should go without saying. I think everyone in our community is really saying that quite a bit, but that's the number one determinant of who lives and who dies. And a lot of times, you got to be able to get to the fight. You got to be able to get away from the fight. You got to be able to function during it. And the type of fitness I think is always something people debate, but there's quite a few facets of it. Facets of it. You might be great at 12-mile rucking, but it's going to be hard when you take contact. You may be good at CrossFit and you can take contact really well, but you're going to have trouble with that 12-mile ruck to be able to get to the location. It's a mixture of things. You got to have a good, well-rounded fitness base, and it's got to be varied. And also, I think another thing I'm seeing in the community, and people might disagree with me, I've seen a rise in trends of people that are like, "Oh, we're going to do fitness and we're going to incorporate like shouldering guns and like lifting things in ways that make us better shooters." And I'm not sure that's the right avenue either. And there's people that are pretty reputable that are in it and stuff. I don't think you have to work out specifically towards operating, but I think that you should have a good fitness base, and then it just kind of comes naturally.
I can respect it and cringe it at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I could it was, I think I saw a video that was a GBRS guy doing it. It's probably Cole, whatever. It was Cole or DJ over at GBRS, and they were like in their gym, and then they had a rubber band on a gun.
Yep.
And it was like,
I saw it.
And this is the it's like, no, I can look at that and go, I think I know what he's doing, but that doesn't mean that when I go to the gym every day, I'm shouldering a rifle. I think what he's doing is he's isolating muscles within his. This is where I would go to ask for somebody else for but there's a difference between how do I say this without just saying nothing at all? Yeah, it makes sense, but and you know what? Eventually, we'll probably learn another thing that we can figure out how to do that better. Like I remember at one point in time, Ranger Battalion, and getting this, it's going to be like, okay, this is what I can go back to, but. You had to be able to do so many push-ups in 2 minutes to do the thing. Okay, and so some people would just do push-ups, and some people would work out this way, and everyone's body required something different. But I had a squad leader who said, "You're great at benching, and you're great at doing push-ups. You don't have the endurance, not because your pectorals are wearing up, but because these little muscly things up here are getting tired. So every day that you do push-ups, just do planks, but do them at like not planks, but like straight bent arms, so that you're wearing out these things to become more." He was very enthusiastic about like physical fitness, but like physical therapy is another word for it. It's like sports medicine kind of stuff. And so he was able to like identify and direct the people underneath him in like, okay, you need to get better at this. And the objective right now is to get better at push-ups. And so how we're going to get better at push-ups is you're going to do some push-ups, but then you're going to do this exercise. Okay. And then you know what happened? Everyone got better at push-ups
Exactly.
Whereas the other guy who was just like, well, just do more push-ups. It's like, well, for some people, that's the answer. Like, just do them is sometimes the answer. And so like with the fitness thing, I definitely agree with you. I am prone to saying, well, I'll just muscle through it. Like, I know my confession, my tactical confession is that I have fucking grit. And so when I have to like go do the thing, I'll just go do the thing. but eventually I won't be able to, but I'll keep trying. And it's like, oh, quit before you die. Like, no, the problem is that I've already quit. I just haven't admitted it yet when it comes to that fitness level. And so what I need to do now, I know what I need to work on. And so that's like the being, the confession time. All right. But it is like, because I think, when I get there, I'll just muscle through it. I'll just fight through it. And the answer is no, you can't. It's not always the case. My conscience tells me when I'm lacking.
I think that there's something to be said about that. Like, and mental toughness isn't something you can measure, but it is something you need, and it is something that you need as well. Most people in the podcast aren't going to know anything about me. I'm kind of a fitness guy. It's kind of in my background and stuff like that. And I think one thing that I've noticed working out with some people that I've been able to, there's being fit, is being prepared. And another thing too is like knowing exactly where you can throttle something is an entirely big skill of its own. And knowing, okay, how hard can I push? How hard can I do these things? But also like, where's that throttle and for how long? And I recommend not only doing some workouts, but doing something that would resemble like metabolic conditioning in WODs, because developing the ability to be like, okay, how hard can I hit this intensity? And where is my mental breaking point where I'm like, okay, my mind's overtaking me or something else is a really valuable thing. I got rhabdo one time, and that was obviously throttling too high. And that's a lesson. And it really affected my selection output later on for it. But I was trying to go for selection, and it really affected that kind of goal of mine. And that was something to be chewed out about later on, and rightfully so, because it was like, okay, that's not how you handle these things. So knowing exactly where you can throttle things is really important.
Mm-hmm. All right. So are we moving on from getting fit?
Yeah. Sorry.
Right.
I would say develop a philosophy as rule 10. Like, I'm not saying what your philosophy should be, but you should have some sort of philosophy about what you do. And this is like exactly your game, which I think is kind of fun. You should need to have a philosophy about how you look at things, how you filter the unknown, and how you handle and tackle things. What are your goals? It's going to be determined by your larger philosophy.
Okay. So we're talking about both metaphysics and like objectives.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
on a very much on a metaphysical level, though. Yeah.
Yeah, because goals would define a hierarchy, which would define an ethic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We'll talk more about that in the future.
I think it's probably one of the hardest ones. That's an entire podcast probably by itself, but it's a good one.
Yeah, well, I think. Well, there's a horrible voice crack. Fine. I think now one of the things that I do see changing is that like we're starting to look back at these things again, especially as both inside of gun culture and outside of it. Is that like the kind of anti-intellectualism, I don't need no smartness kind of era is gone, and like. No, it doesn't mean that we're engaged in navel gazing, but you can't tell me you know what navel gazing is when you can't tell me you know what reality is. So like, let's move on.
For real. Yeah, exactly.
I'm being a little assertive, but develop a philosophy. Okay. So that's 10. How many more pages do I need?
I did 13 total. I think these were like the ones that I really thought. 11, I think, was like one of the hard ones. And that was, know your weakness, talk about it to others, and work on it. Don't just leave it. Example, my weakness is I talk quickly, and it's like a thing. I have a really good radio ear, and on the radio though, sometimes I'm like, I even am trying to get off the radio as fast as possible. Like I'll say something and it's too fast and I have to repeat myself. It also doesn't mean it's been a problem when I've been like in stressful situations, because I usually get really quiet when things are getting really crazy, but, know your weakness. Like that's my weakness, and be able to say, yeah, it's my problem, and here's what I'm doing to work on it. I tend to talk quickly, or other people, it's going to be like, hey, I need to work on my fitness, or I need to be a better shooter. I'm not a very good shooter, or I'm not very good at these things. And so like, know your weakness and be able to talk about it. Number 12, I'd say, is understand living in your gear. That's a really hard one.
Ooh.
Yeah. Like, for a lot of people who don't know, it's very different to have a plate carrier you put on, or to set up your gear a certain way. Like, oh, it's really cool. I got the right pouches here and everything else, and I can move. Go live in it for a year. And that's hard to do. Civilians don't typically do that, but as a deployment, that's like a really big thing for me. Like, how did you set your sling up? How do you do this? Because you're not just on a range operating. You got to wear this thing for a long period of time. and you're going to find out a lot about it. I'll talk about
Very,
more of that in a minute.
very much so. Yeah.
I'll talk more about that in a minute if we want to get back to it. And 13, I would say, I had to throw this in there. I wanted to keep 12, but I was like, okay, this one has to be there. Master navigation. Got to know where you're going. And it's got to be more than just, I know the street or I know block ranges. That's a really big cop one. Block ranges are cool. That's not everything. You got to know where north is. You got to know how to navigate. You got to be able to work with a map and compass. It's a critical skill. You got to know where you are.
Okay. Navigation is my weakness. What do you need?
Is your weakness, you say?
Well, navigation is one of them. Like, I'm really good at land nav, like terrain association and that kind of stuff. But like, I lose directionality really quickly. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
I'd say that's good. You can say that. I mean, it's really important. But yeah, I think that's like one that, from my experience, like is really important.
Well, I'm saying this in the sense of like, I know that I should be better at that. Like, I moved. I could tell you how to get around. It took a long time, but I could tell you how to get around. Let's say when I lived in Minneapolis, but I really didn't know. There's a lot. I did not know a lot of getting around Minneapolis until like the riots hit and we were doing a lot of different movements. That was
it's everything.
It's like, oh wow, I discovered 4 more ways to get from this place to this place without ever touching hardball. Like, and now where we're moving, it's like, how am I terrain associating better? And I get lost. I get lost too quickly. I grew up, I especially when driving, I get lost too quickly.
That's an interesting thing to kind of think about, and I gotta
it's not a problem with map reading. It's not like it's more like it's not a problem
like
with
your basic directions, like which way I went this far for how long, and this is probably about how far I went, kind of.
Yeah, and some of it is probably because when I'm driving, I'm thinking about things. So I'm like I'm like, I know how to get there, but I don't know, like, I know how to get there as in like, I know, okay, I see it's terrain association in the sense of like, okay, well at the Applebee's I make a left and then I go down 3 lights and I know what it looks like and I've driven this 3 times, so I know kind of how I get here. And then I got to make this turn and there's always somebody hitting those kind of things, like very like subconscious, but not the same thing as like, how do I get home without looking at a map? Like I could figure it out, but like
GPS.
Yeah, or GPS, like, well, I know where this road goes, and then I'll take it to a road that I recognize, and then I'll take that road. But when those roads are not all grid, it changes things. All right, so we're back from a brief break. Turns out when you drink water, things have to happen. Admission of guilt. But we were talking about navigation. And I think in many ways, I was trying to say I could be better at land navigation. I really could be. I could be better at it.
I think navigation is one of those things. The 2 things about navigation, I would say, there are the operate, like the actual things you do, like the little things. If anyone's listening to this and they don't know about like attack points and things, that's a good things to know. Especially
how would you find out about attack points? Like that is an orthodoxy word that means one thing and sounds really cool, but it's an OODA loop word right there. Yeah,
that's a good point. That's kind of I would say, well, the easiest answer is ask a Green Beret. if you don't, Green Berets are so good at land nav. But if you don't know what that is, learn how to plan a route by looking at a map and then minimizing the amount of dead reckoning you have to do by finding a point that you're actually going to pick up your map and compass again. But more than just map and compass, aside from like land nav is on a course or something where we're doing it for usually some kind of course or qualification, knowing where you are is really important. But also I would say reference the places you usually go, know which way is north, be able to use your cardinal directions, and then also be able to say it. So in your mind, one thing in law enforcement, one of the most critical rules is that you have to always know where you are, because if something goes down, and it goes down a lot, you have to be able to call it out immediately on the radio. Whether it could be a traffic stop or something you just see, or I'm driving along and I see some crazy thing happen and I got to go deal with it right now. Everybody has to know where I am, and I have to know where I am too. So knowing where you are is really important. I'd say one of the most important things you can do is be able to voice where you are in a way that people can understand or generally understand it and be able to do it on the fly. They will also increase your awareness and your street smarts, but that's a street survival skill. It's really important, is to master your navigation. Another one that kind of like leads into is having common terms with other people. Maybe that might be another rule I could add in. There's having common terms with people you deal with in your tribe, be able to discuss things. Someone the other day asked me about, we drew a glass house, and they said, okay, like, how would you describe these things? And it was interesting to hear kind of everyone talk about it. And they're trying to say, oh, well, it's the northwest corner of this house that we're going to go clear and stuff like that. And I was like, well, that's the black wall. And that's a military term. You have your white, red, green, and black wall. And then I said that, and someone else was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, okay, fine. And then we decided to just call it A, B, C, and D, which is the same concept, but it's more of like a lower form of like law enforcement is kind of using now. It's the first time I've ever encountered it, but it's a thing. Apparently, I looked it up. But you know, but if I was talking to you and I said, okay, we're gonna stack up on the red wall and we're gonna go ahead and clear this house counterclockwise, you know what I mean, and that's like a really important thing. And if whatever it is, however you're gonna do it with you and your buddies and your tribe, like know how to have an operational use of some terms about where you are, how you're going, where you're going, and how you can do it. Orient to your orientation and orienting to your environment is really important.
A food for thought question. Maybe we won't have time to answer it, but is like, so that you have an SOP term, right? SOP, standard operating procedure. The idea of like red, green, white, black wall colors, colored walls is wow, that could be taken wrong. Oops. Whatever. But
did you just do a white supremacy?
I just did a white supremacy. Oh no. I needed to pray 5 Hail Floyds. Sorry, that was really sacrimonious. My point being said is having common terms. People in the military often we oftentimes have this like military concept of like camaraderie, and sometimes I wonder if it's just that we have shared language. Like
it's a big part of it.
Yeah, like I know how to. I'm like, yeah, like I can. Dude, that guy's he's just a blue falcon. No one cares. And you're like, oh, that's fun. And so, we have a lingo now. It's a gang. It's funny. Let's go. No, but it's a food for thought term of like which comes first, the SOP or is like the shared terms or like the camaraderie. And I think the shared terms come first and the camaraderie comes second.
I used to hate them. And now that you're mentioning it, I'm like, because I'm finding myself now that I'm like out, like I'm getting more nostalgic about the military. Maybe that's like one of those things that it's like it happens, I guess. But the terminology is a big one because there's a lot of terms that we have that are really like, okay, we're gonna pop smoke or diddy mao, or someone the other day I was looking for someone in law enforcement and I described I didn't have it. I was looking for someone suspicious, didn't have it. I called it on the radio as a dry hole, and half the people knew what I meant. The other half had no idea what I meant by that. And I was like, okay, whatever. But yeah, it's like a dry hole. That's probably something I shouldn't be saying. But yeah.
Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah.
All right. So having common terms, part of land navigation, and serving your tribe or loving your tribe. All right. So anything else? So let's go. I'm gonna restate all these skill sets again, and then you'll add your commentary. So one of them is, the first one is, how do you move quickly, quietly, etc. This is learn the basics well. How do you move? The second one is read some doctrine. And that is so that you can understand how other people think and you can conceptualize scenarios and concepts ahead of time without being too bogged down in the what ifs.
To get a working framework, yeah.
Yep. Third one is talk to strangers. And I think that's the one that I could get better at is I talk just straight up talking to strangers. Expect to fight. And I scribbled bad words. Expect to fight, rehearse it in your mind. Note, which also includes knowing the condition of your weapon.
Yeah.
Yep. Loving your tribe. You are not going to be efficient as a lone ranger. Okay. Expect tomorrow to look different. Skill sets, not resume. Build skill sets. All right. And then 8 is stage your gear and your kit.
Yep.
And then I have written, I am not going to be able to function if I don't know how to, like, basically if I don't know how to find things. And I think, and actually, you know, the stage your gear and your kit is an interesting one in gun culture, because I think of how many times I've reset up my kit, and after I've done it enough times, I start feeling kind of proud in how many times I've changed it, and how many times I've made little teeny tweaks. And then and I think that also pairs well with understanding living in your gear. But like staging your kit is in some ways, I mean, it's kind of a ritual, and we like doing it. Like it's a task. It's like washing the dishes. You know, you feel accomplished when you've done it, but also, I mean, not like, you know, I didn't like run a 250-mile race, but I did definitely like, okay, it's the small steps, but also it's like, I don't know. That one has gotten closer to me, because it's like staging your gear. It's like, okay, I know where my batteries are, and I know where my heat stuff is, and I know more. Like, it's a lot less of it's moved away from having a trunk kit and a backpack kit and a thing. It's moved towards like, I know where all of my stuff is, which I'm historically bad at. Like, if you were to see the rest of this office, you'd probably have a neurotic breakdown just by the amount of like piles of paper and notes and stickies and stuff everywhere. But it's been a good one for me. And then 9 is get fit. Go ahead. Going back to 8, go ahead.
Talking about your kit, I mean, it could be something simple. Like yesterday, I was on shift, and I ended up, or 2 days ago, I guess now it's night shift. It's hard to think. I ended up getting a new carrier that was given to me. So I actually am running like rifle plates on duty and everything else, but I got a new one and set it up real quick, get ready to go hit the streets with it. And I got everything working, except that I know I have to keep a key card that opens all kinds of things, including like jail doors and my PD. I usually keep it on it's tethered to me, but finding a place to put it was like really hard. It took me a minute, and it was like, okay, I know I've got everything worked out right now. That's one I've got to figure out, and it's okay that I don't have the answer at the moment. Like, I'll just fiddle around, look like an idiot for a minute until I figure it out. The other thing I would say too on that, you mentioned car, like like your trunk kit and stuff like that. I think one place in our culture that's really neglected is your car. Like, set your car up, and it's got to have you got to have something to be able to recover. You got to be able to plug a spare, plug a hole. You got to have a spare tire. You got to be able to change spare tires. You got to be able to jump somebody else. Toe straps are a really good thing to have. Like, there's like things that are really important, and you don't think about it, but it's awesome that you have like an like you know, I don't have like a truck gun, but if you have a truck gun, good on you. It's awesome you have a truck gun, but it's not going to do you any good if you got a flat and now you're stuck, because now you're in real trouble. And mobility is really important, but being able to have those things is good. I actually keep a really, really good med kit in my car that's on a backpack, but I have other things in there too. I live in a city that, due to defunding and due to some other due to some people that are in currently our DA and stuff like that, like the police are not doing as much. And I've seen some car crashes and stuff that were extreme, and that no one responded to them. And it was like, okay, like, I have a flare. I put a road flare out to be able to block something off real quick while I go and look at some medical. That's really happened. I haven't really done that. I've drove on a major crash and had to go take care of it real quick, just as a citizen. And I think little things to think about are those two. Like, have different mission sets, have different bags for different mission sets, and also stage them so that you can use them and they're ready to go when you need them, because you're not always just making holes in people. That's kind of
I think this is an example where that like cultural maturity is growing. Is that like I'm starting to see a lot more focus on just kind of slow, gradual development of skill sets and equipment, as opposed to, I'm not saying fad chasing. Maybe that's my phase in life, but it's definitely been one of those where like, I like to see less time spent trying to justify the purchase of a piece of equipment with like some design scenario, and more time, especially even in my own life, going that like it is a deficiency. I have a medical kit in my car, but I need to make improvements to my car before I'm happy with it. Like, I would never, and these are things like Yeah, I don't like the idea of like driving around my car, leaving it locked, and then but like not having like having an unsecure firearm in there is where am I going? What am I doing? These kind of things versus because I travel. I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit, and it's like okay, the more I travel, the better I get at like figuring out an SOP for the vehicle. Oh, in this wheel well, there's always a med kit, and then for my off road vehicles, I've always got these kind of things, and I figure stuff out. But take time with it and be okay with not having the solution tomorrow, because sometimes gear's like candy. It feels good to buy, but then you got to throw it away.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, or it also knowing when things expire or setting things up right. I don't keep a gun in my car. I keep gun on me, but I keep extra ammo in my car. So if I have something, I can grab a little sling real quick, which got extra ammo and extra tourniquets, like really good to go.
That's smart.
My handgun.
Yeah.
I don't. It's just like little things I think I've kind of picked up on. I think, and things have changed. You got to figure out what works for you. The one thing I have, sometimes you have things that are overkill. Like one thing that I'm like my dream, and it's never going to happen, but the one I'm always waiting for is I keep a little bit of rigging because I have a dream someday that I'm going to get like a car that's like hanging off of an overpass, and I got to go do like a rappel rescue. Being a good air assault soldier, I'm always into like my rigging and rappelling and stuff, and that's never going to happen. But if I needed to make something and build something real quick, I can build some hasty stuff to really secure somebody in, and you keep up with your knots and things like that. Those are good. Like that's not something everyone needs to know, but for me, it's like okay, well that's a capability I want, fine, but I got to make sure I upkeep the kit ready to go and have everything staged so that I just pull out and go and actually get a working system up in the field. And I think that whatever you're going to do, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I keeping momentum moving on. We've got nine, which is get fit. 10, which is develop a philosophy, which includes your ethics, your goals, your metaphysics. 11, know your weaknesses, talk about them to others, and work on it. Number 12, understanding living in your gear. And this one you kind of started talking about. I'm going to go 13 is master land navigation. So back to 12, understanding living in your gear. You started something and we never finished it.
Yes, and it kind of goes off of staging things, but your gear setup is always going to be changed. Like you said, tweaking things out and changing stuff out. You're going to learn over time what it is, what you need, what you don't need. But long-term time spent in gear is a very different thing. The biggest thing I see with all my friends that, hey, they want to get into become responsibly armed or something, awesome. They want to buy some guns, awesome. I can think of a couple friends on the top of my head right now that have some really good kits. They've got a PWS AR, they've got a Benelli Supernova, I've got a whole bunch of things ready to go, which is really cool. But it's like, hey, time for you to get a belt with some holsters and some slings. It's time for you to go ahead and upgrade it a little more. And then once we all get to the point where, okay, I got my plates and I've got my helmet, and I got everything else. That's awesome. But understand, it doesn't matter who you are. After you wear that thing for 6 hours, you're going to get little hot spots. It's going to get uncomfortable. And the more time you do it, the better it gets. But also developing yourself to be able to do that is a big issue. Because I think you see when you get deployed, being deployed, you spend a lot of time with things. I mean, it's not only just a military, it's not just like a soldier thing, but there is an element to having to have a gun on you at all times, even when you're sleeping for a considerable amount of time, months or a year. You'll learn some stuff about it. You don't always have to have your gun ready to go. I don't always have to have. One thing I always laugh at, you see like movies or TV and stuff like that, and everybody always has. They're out on the patrol and they have the rifles at the ready to go, like in a load ready. Like at any given moment, they're going to be able to pull it up, and it looks cool. And even like a lot of people will say, "Oh, do that in schools." I'll tell you, go do it. Do it for a couple hours. You're not going to be able to. Like your rifle is going to be doing some weird stuff over time. You're going to be carrying it in weird ways. It's just the way it is. Like when you're living in something.
It's going back to like the false. Like there's a difference between a guy who's just being lazy and leaving his gun down, and like I one hand carry my rifle all the time, all the time,
all the time.
Just because why? Because I'm moving around. Like I'm not going to justify it to you. Like
I think that was one of the biggest things. I think it was one of the biggest things I learned in like with non-combat MOSs and like I think like NCO school is like a big example of that, where the non-combat MOSs want to tell you like what to do, and you're like, nah, like I can't be ready for a firefight every 5 seconds, and that's not the way the real people do this. That's not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're ready when something happens. But
It's make work is what it is. It's make work. It's
yeah.
being alert all the time so you can kind of figure out when not to. And maybe let's give the guy a little bit of grace. Maybe they make you be hyper alert all the time in school so that when you're in school, you're like, oh, this is dumb. I know when I'm not. And you can start figuring out when not to be hyper alert. We'll give them grace. We'll be good people.
Okay. It's a good point. It's building good habits. It's just not being realistic about it. I think one of my other things too is one of my favorite ways to carry with a fanny pack. I love it. Like, people hate it. I love it. And it's the fastest draw.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, a handgun. Sorry, and some people hate it. Some people I love it. Some people hate it, and they're like, "Oh, it's harder to draw." Yeah, it's like a second slower than drawing from my appendix. And but when it's really hot, it's nice outside. I can carry a couple extra items. No one's going to see what's in it. I got other items I can put in it. It's nice. So there's a little bit of a trade off there, and that's okay as long as you have a secure way to get it and it's ready to go as soon as I draw. We're good. I think that people put so sorry. You'll put emphasis on it in a way that's not really always healthy, because we always assume that, oh my God, we're in a near ambush and we need our gun immediately right now. And if I don't shoot that person in a sub-second draw, like, we're going to die. It's like, no, that's not really the way things always go down. You do need the gun on you, and you need to be able to, it has to be ready to go. Mm-hmm. I just think that there's kind of that middle ground. Also, side note, if you're going to put a fanny pack on, and I'm a big fan of it, give it a carabiner so you can tie it to your belt so that you can run with it, because you're going to have a bad time otherwise. Be able to run with what you have.
Put a carabiner on it so that you can attach it to your belt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a story for another day. But yeah.
Oh, it sounds painful.
No, it's not that big a deal. That covers all of them. But I think those are the really good basics that I think people should, if you're a citizen and you're in the mindset of trying to develop this and to be that guy who can be cool and be an asset during the riots, these are some pretty good places to start.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Well, when the Mongol horde comes, huh?
Yeah, I think when you say when the Mongolian horde comes, that is like a straight up military term. You might as well be saying, you get your SOPs and your red and blacks, and you're like, the Mongolian horde.
I never told you, but I hate the word SOPs, by the way.
You hate the word SOPs?
I do. Like, it's important to know, but
why?
Because everyone wants to relegate everything to SOPs, and sometimes you don't have an SOP for that, and sometimes we overlook things that are not because we don't have an SOP for it.
What? Like, I think I know what you're saying, but I'm like,
they're important. I'm just saying, I think I have this really interesting little, like, personal kind of opinion about SOPs. Everybody wants to.
Yeah, my criticism of SOPs is that a lot of them look really good on paper, and then when you get to application, you're like, that's it's the issue of, like, doctrine and dogma of, like, I go back to, I've been going back to this argument a couple times lately, but it's the idea of, like, strong walling versus points of domination in a shoot house is like, okay, if you're at the stage where you points of domination everything, then you're at a 60%, because, like, you have to be able to, a strong wall turns into a points of domination when one guy walks. And why does he walk? Because there's a thing in the room. But
there's furniture there. Yeah, exactly.
But if you're of the mindset that you points of domination everything, then you're not working you're not working as a well-oiled unit or a machine. You got to, like, you're oversimplifying, and you're missing you're overcomplicating through SOP simplification, and being like, the goal you want to see the students or the squads and the teams being able to never lose consciousness while they're moving through a shoot house, or awareness of where they're at and what they're moving for and what they're shooting at, and being able to move effectively and adapt to each room shape as they move without it being jittery and stopping and starting and stopping and starting. And as opposed to it like, oh, well, I just don't see it as like a white paper equation. I see it as something like, we have a standard, an SOP, so that we have something to fall back on in the event that we don't know how to communicate about something. And so then, but we don't want that to be Actually, an SOP should not be the same as a doctrine, and that's why they have different names.
Yes.
So
Because doctrines are more flexible. And I think about
doctrines are less flexible. SOPs are more.
You think so?
Yeah, doctrine by its definition, doctrine it cannot be flexible. Doctrine is
maybe we might be on different pages on that, which I guess is for me. I view doctrine as like a guideline, and SOPs are kind of like how we actually react to things. Maybe I'm just wrong. And maybe that's why we have disagreement on this.
In theology, doctrine is non-flexible.
That's true. Doctrine and theology is non-flexible.
Yeah,
we'll get to that in a minute. Well, the one thing I do think of is you mentioned the whole points of domination thing, and one of my closest family member that I'll leave ambiguous right now just went to cephalic last year, and he went with one of my best friends who's he's also an ODA, and I was like, oh man, I would love to go to that school. And they came back and they're like, dude, it got dumb, and everything's points of domination, and everything is like it has to be this and everything else there. And they had some interesting critiques of it, including one of them got asked to be an instructor, and he's like, never.
Never meet your heroes, never go to your favorite school.
But it's interesting to kind of hear like some of the critiques of it, and for that reason, yeah, there's an element. I mean, that like those guys, at that level are pretty good, but there is an element of like they take a sledgehammer approach to every problem.
Sure.
And sometimes it is really simple. Like one thing I told you that we've talked about in the past, like CQB, an example was like, okay, we know what a bathroom looks like, and I'm not saying I instantly clear it just because I see it's a bathroom, but if I see the bathroom, like do I really have to call short room? Maybe if I got like a whole stack behind me, but if I'm with a bunch of dudes who are really high level, like we all know it's a bathroom. It's probably got a toilet in there. It's probably got a shower. Clear it,
Yeah, or like when you go into a bedroom, someone's going to have to take the long wall, and you don't need to communicate that the person who goes beside the bed is not going to also take the second corner and walk over the bed and to get his second corner. But that's like hypersimplification. It's like, oh, it's a bedroom and I'm on the right, so I'm going to start moving automatically. I don't need to like wait to be told to move.
Yeah, and ultimately someone's going to get it wrong, and it's fine. You just keep going.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine as in like, okay, well, I did that wrong. Let's figure. Now I can learn from that. That's it. Mm-hmm. As opposed to like, making a big egotistical deal about it, which kind of kills the point. But, So let's do a quick summary where we're at, because we've spent a lot of time talking about this concept of tactical maturity. And you've gone through a list that you've described as basically the skill sets of a tactically mature citizen, which I think is an excellent. Thank you for your contribution. Moving on. Do we even have time? Do you want to jump into the next topic that we were talking about? Because
sure,
we could probably leave this. We could definitely. We got time. Let's do it, because I want to make sure we get it done well. But it's kind of in the next section. We're talking a little bit about you and I having known each other. We've talked about a number. We've had a long series of conversations that involve kind of the state of the nation, the state of the world, and like you're talking about Cephalic, and while you were talking about. So going back into this one, you're talking about Cephalic and how like they went there and it wasn't everything they expected it to be, and then like we can also run into this thing of like never meet your heroes because you'll be disappointed in who they are. And I think when we step away from when we step back and look at culture as a whole, one of the challenges that we're facing is just kind of like encroaching nihilism. I don't think it's encroaching anymore. I think now it's embedded. Like nihilism is the status quo. When reading the Strashaw generational theory book, the fourth turning, I think they predicted that like the end of the millennials would basically be the new hope bringers, which is a little bit of I'm a little bit over exaggeration, but their description of who the millennial generation would become was completely different than what I think. It's like they thought that millennials would be more ordered and they would be back to kind of like the GI generation. I'm being simplified in it, but I think with the advent of the internet and everything that's been going on over the last couple of years, it's really easy to get like super black pilled in the sense of, looking at our government and our populations and our social leaders and kind of going, well, it's all a lie. And we see that in gun culture. We see that kind of micro revolution come and go quickly, where it's like somebody becomes a celebrity and then they gain a lot of momentum, and then we find out that they're lying about their military history, and so then all veterans are in question, and then we see this kind of up and down oscillation between optimism and like optimism and hyper focus to like disillusion and disappointment. And at the same time, we also have things like the southern border going on and crime in the streets and Minneapolis falling apart and cities like Minneapolis. Like, I think I saw a thing it's like Andy No posted something the other day about a 117-year-old church was burned down just because, whatever. And it's like, it's kind of hard to look out in the world and be optimistic, man.
Optimism. I think it's part of the reason is the working definition I feel with most people on optimism is probably not tenable. Okay. And it needs to be redefined. You can be a pessimist and still not be a nihilist. And you can be optimistic and still be realistic. It just depends on the things you hope for and the things that you think are untenable or broken. That seems really simple, but I find that remembering that is one of the hardest things right now. For anyone listening right now, this is recorded just after the 15th vote for the Speaker of the House. And Kevin McCarthy was finally granted speakership. But one thing that was really interesting to me about watching this whole thing was it was very fascinating to hear all the congressmen on both sides and people in the news media listen to this thing try to sell you on why it was so important that there was a vote that was being stalled. And it was important to them for a lot of reasons. They're not being sworn in. But it was like, is this really this giant national security issue that people are going to die over? And some people make the argument. But it was interesting to me to see that I think that there was definitely some selling as to the urgency of it. And it's very easy to get swept up into those things without being able to stop and be like, okay, is this that important? Is there this issue? Or if we see the world right now and we see how many things are a lie, is this something that I need to be worried about or concerned about or sweat over? Even if it does have issues, even if it has some kind of consequences, is it something that I can control? And also, is it something that I can't? There are things that you can't control that are worth worrying about, but is it something that should be worth worrying about? I think a few months ago, I was in a Thanksgiving meal with my family, and one of my family members who is kind of newer to the family knew that I was kind of a societal pessimist in a way, which means I don't think that things are necessarily getting better. I think they're going to get worse, but I'm not depressed about it. And so they decided, oh, you think that things are going to get worse, therefore you're cynical. And I was very fascinated that my fiance was like, no, he's not. And I'm like, yeah, I'm very, very specifically don't say I'm cynical. Like it's very easy to fall into those things. And the reason is because what do you put your hope in?
Okay, yeah. So I think those are stalling words, not Stalin words, but stalling words.
Did I miss the question?
No, I didn't ask a question. I'm thinking about this because it's like I've kind of got two paradigms in conflict in my head right now, and one of them is that like to the people in Congress, that vote is very important. It's very, very important to them, right? It's important to them in some of them because it determines whether or not they get how they're like, do they get to participate in this event or this part or this place, and they play their role in government, and how their role in government will be defined for the next, let's just say, 2 years, right? And so we got that kind of stuff going on. But then for somebody like you and I, it's not really that important. Like it in the grand scheme of things, it's much less important than like say issues with maybe the health of a family member, or the state of the community outside your house, or the the objectives that you have in your workplace, or these kind of things, right? So like they have interactions for sure, but so on the one side, I have this paradigm of like, well, we're all different tools, and we all have different things that we're fixated on, and those fixations are the ways by which we orient the world. It's a little bit Jordan Peterson like.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And so, like, to them, it is very important, and so they're trying to convince everybody else that it's important, because to them, it also is very important that, like, to the cultist, the success of the cult is necessary. But then, when to those of us outside of that environment, we have this other option. We have this other side where it's like, I know you're trying to tell me that it's important, but it's not convincing me, right? So, like, I lost. All of this whole all this whole Kevin McCarthy thing, and voting for the Speaker of the House kind of is coming after Christmas. It's after Christmas and New Year's break, and like I didn't really get into that sort of paying attention on what was going on until maybe a couple days ago. So like I knew there was going to be a vote for the Speaker of the House, but I didn't really know who was. I didn't really pay much attention, and by the time like the seventh time that he had failed, I stopped paying attention to the scenario as a whole. By the seventh vote for the Speaker of the House, I stopped paying attention. So I didn't know that there were already 15 of them.
I think one thing that is also interesting was it was right around that time that you heard all the interviews with all the different congressmen. And it was, at least for me anyway, it was kind of chaotic because everybody was saying everybody else was lying, and they had completely different stories on it. And people were selling really hard on both sides about why you had to care about these things. And you should care about it to some extent, but it was a lot of drama. But it was interesting that it was an example of they both can't be right. Mm-hmm. And they also can't be as extreme as people are saying they are. Well, this is the hindsight of things. And it's very interesting to see, like, okay, this is a game you get sucked into, or you take a step back and be like, okay, the world is getting pretty weird and it's getting kind of dumb.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Well, okay. So this is exactly how I've been thinking. This is not exactly how I've been thinking, but this is the point. One of the reasons I think is about around the time of Kavanaugh, the Kavanaugh hearing, and before then, like I started looking into like kind of being a little bit more like let's just say politically aware. This is when I had started reading a lot more on like philosophy and political philosophy, and trying to like understand different things and not just be like growing up in my own environment, but like reading more and getting more, trying to spending a little bit more time developing my own ideas and like what I thought about things, and identifying the differences between conservatism and libertarianism and liberalism and all these other kind of words. And so like I had this issue because I was listening to some of the stuff for the House, the representatives talking about who they think should, be in take the Speaker of the House, and I'll be frank with you, it all sounded like vapid psychobabble.
Exactly.
Not like I couldn't understand it, but it was like, oh, such and such is such a strong and upstanding citizen and has done so much good for the blah 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 blah, and it's just like, well, first of all, none of that is true, and second of all, none of that matters. And third of all, like, I wouldn't trust you anyway. I have an issue here. And so, like, for me, maybe when it comes to politics, like, it's easy to become a little bit black-pilled. But one thing that, especially when it comes to, like, the topics of, like, gun control or gun culture, when it comes to American politics, it's rather clear that everyone who's talking about it is so morally disqualified from having any sort of conversation about the subject whatsoever that even giving them the time of day is causing is in question. Is probably the end of the day rant is that, like, I don't care about debating you anymore. There's obviously not debating you, but it's not that I don't care. It's that when you hear this kind of this the importance of all the pomp and circumstance thing, it really is the emperor has no clothes, but instead of being naked, he's brainless. And I'm not talking about the president. I'm talking about like the level of like moral dictum that's being pumped out of the sort of not the social media, but like the political class of like, he's such a good person. He just murdered 15,000 people. That doesn't qualify you as a good person.
I think that one thing to kind of add in that is, and this kind of plays to my faith system quite a bit, is that there is a realization that something is up with our culture, that the people who get ahead in it right now get ahead by, it's not that they don't believe in anything, they get ahead by believing in that thing.
Yes.
It's a qualifying thing you're seeing right now. And for that reason, I think when I wrote number 5 on the skill set of like, love your tribe, that goes into it, because it's so fascinating to me that on especially the left and also on the right, politics is a spectator sport now. At all different levels. And a lot of times there's that kind of thing you're saying right now where it's like, you don't really know the people in Congress. Like, they're not really part of my tribe. I like different ideas. I like policies. I can talk about it all I want, but they're not really what represents my interests in the world necessarily. Now, supposedly it does, but understanding that and hoping for the best, but also understanding that, taking that little head space, just a little bit of head-heart distance between what I care about and what I'm kind of looking at is really important.
Okay, because I've had some difficulty recognizing that, like, it's not that I've had some difficulty. Over the years I've been able to be better at recognizing everything that I know about this person is filtered through some form of media apparatus and some form of lensing, and everything that they say, they're saying to a camera, and they're saying it to that camera so that it can go out in the public. And it's like, I don't really know who you are, and I don't really know.
You see it on social media. I mean, our friends, people we actually know have a totally different social media than they are in real person. And that's not a criticism. I think it's easy to fall into that. I think I've been guilty of that in the past, and it's the way it is, you know?
Okay. Okay. Let's cut the butter on this one. And like, I think trying to address this from a system of politics is just it's not going anywhere, because I'm not throwing it out. I'm looking at it within like gun culture. I'm thinking of like, okay, John Lovell. When John Lovell talks, he oftentimes will mention something when he's talking about something faith related. He'll like include an asterisk in his own presentation, saying he'll include an asterisk in his presentation saying something like, what's the word, of like, you know, some of you might not like appreciate that I'm a Christian, but you know, yada that, but it's what's important to me. I need to talk about it. It's like, there is a little bit, like, everyone does have a bit of a persona on media, but like I don't think you can get away with that. I don't think you can get away from it. Sorry. I don't think you can, like,
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
There's a difference. There's a difference between, there will always be a difference between the way that I present myself on social media versus the way that I present myself at home alone or with my own life. But the issue that rises is when when what you present yourself as is a contradiction of who you are off camera. I would have an issue.
I agree with that completely. Like, everybody has a public persona, and they're rightfully so. We should have a public face, because this is the way society goes. This is the nature of mankind. You should have certain things that are in the public and certain things that are in private. And I think that the violation of what's public and private has been not the reason we've seen a cultural decline in the United States, but it's been the delivery system, the method. And so it's okay, but it's true that when you have somebody who is one way in public, or their public persona, but it's different in private, that's a very it's a very disheartening thing. It's kind of dishonest. And so, yeah, there is, it's very cliche to say genuine or being genuine, but like, you want to be genuine in these things, but understand that sometimes you do know somebody, and you get to kind of see the other side of them, but sometimes you don't. And so who your tribe is, and I think it's interesting to me to also hear, like the Daily Wire will talk about tribalism, and they kind of relegate that to political tribalism, which is like a negative thing. You see it on the left, especially, where they're defending whatever the current idea is. But the concept of tribe, or like your influence, maybe there's a better word for it, but people that you actually deal with and you actually know, is a smaller group than we like to pretend it is. And it's very important if you want to be in the gun culture, because you're networking your community, your family, the people you deal with, the people you rub shoulders with, the people you train with, the people that you enjoy hanging out with, even just spending time or cracking a beer open with, are very, very important to how that gets developed. And you have a duty to, and you should be an asset to them, promote them, and care about them. And a lot of people don't care about their tribe, and that's just not. Aside from being a bad team player, it's not tenable.
How do you give an example of somebody not caring about their tribe? like, give me an example of that.
I first one come to mind is kind of extreme. It might not be the best example, but I think about times that, like in a unit or like some people that you know or workplace, and someone kills himself.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone just pretends like they never really cared. You're like, are you serious? Like, really? You know, and it's a defense mechanism, but it's like, okay, you're not up to snuff on taking care of the group. It doesn't mean you have to be a bleeding heart. I think we live in a culture that has kind of weaponized, empathy and weaponized kindness in a way, which isn't a good thing either. That's what virtue signaling is. It's weaponized empathy.
For sure.
But there is an element of like, actually caring about somebody is really, really important. And sometimes you don't like people that are in your direct path, and you don't have to stay with them all the time, but how many families, without getting too preachy, how many families do we have that are just broken, that people don't care about each other, their extended families have issues, and there might be real issues there, but if you're not going to solve it, then no one is. And maybe you can't solve it, but it is incumbent on you to build your community, or at least take care of them, or actually care about somebody else. I think that you look at like the rising crime, for example, as a cop. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for it. Yeah, there's a lot of politics in it, and yeah, there's a lot of DAs that are placed in places that are doing things. But there is another element too, that at the end of the day, we as a culture don't care about each other as much anymore. And it's our neighbors, it's people next door to us, it's the people down the street. And I think that really understanding, I try to get away from the idea, but I think I can't really get away from the idea of that a lot of this stuff is based on the fact that in businesses, in companies, in politics, even in the military now, a lot of the way people will succeed is by not caring about each other. We have an actual incentive not to, and that's something about the culture. I don't have it fully developed. I can't tell you all the resources, all the research necessarily, because there isn't any as to why that would be. But there's a specific sickness in our culture right now that we get ahead by not caring about each other. So, I know people that brag about it. You're like, man.
I don't right now. I don't know. I'll use it. I'll refer to that as social nihilism, as in like, it's not really the point. It's not a good term, but it's like, maybe antisocial, like popular antisocialism, like not antisocialism, popularizing the act of being antisocial, of like, it's not quite the Lone Ranger attitude. It's just very much so like, it's the grind set Sigma male thing, you know, a little bit like, there's different ways of saying male. Yeah, I mean, that was like a thing for like maybe a year, and then it kind of became its own meme, and it's funny, like it is, but like at the same time, a person will always have an advantage in the short run if they're going to only look out for themselves and be smart enough to not let everyone know. I think there's something to be like when you're whether you're in a unit or a group of friends, or you're in a community or whatever, you can hide that you are selfish. And I don't mean selfish as in like looking out for your own self-interest and trying to build a good lifestyle and whatever. I mean, like, when you hold this, it's all about the Benjamins. It's all about me. And that is intended to be identified as like a slur that somebody would say. It's not something that I'm arguing for. Or I'm not trying to use it as a slur, but I am saying, like, when you have this mindset that's deep, but you plastered over it, which your conscience will tell you, you can only get away with it for so long. And eventually you'll be found out. It's the same thing as like stolen valor. Like the gun culture thing, you look at how many times we see it happen where a company will come out with a new thing. And it's just a cash grab, or it's some sort of, not just a cash grab. It's like they're trying to figure out how to build something, and maybe we're expecting too much out of them. But look at how many times we've seen something that, everything's for the boys until, they screwed me over, and then I go off and I start something else. Or how many times we see this, I don't know. I think
it's because if you are acting in selfishness, without sounding like a communist, there is a real duty that we have to one another. And what you're doing is you're shirking that duty. And to get very Jordan Peterson-esque, like in the archetypal man, if such a thing exists, your duty to one another is something that's real, and people know it in social situations. And if you neglect it, people find you out. I think that was a really big thing for me to learn, because I was very much a selfish loner when I was in my early 20s, and like I had to develop it. I didn't know, and but I'm glad I did find out. And once I found out, I was very accountable to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think the communism thing, like we all have responsibility to each other. I don't believe that's what communism believes. I think that's what communism says. Like,
I agree.
I have a very, very I have a very critical view of this concept of communism. I think it's fundamentally a moral lie. Like, in order for you to call yourself a communist, you must have already sold your soul to the devil. There's a certain amount of lying that you have accepted within your own self, and you're using those lies as layers upon layers of lies, because like to hide yourself from your own malice. Because you can't tell me that communism cares anything about the common. It doesn't. It never has, and it never will. It's always about the problem with communism is it's a temptation of getting along so that they can backstab you. There is no true communism is death. It's killing everybody.
I completely agree, and I think you have to establish that, because the number one, when I say duty, like the first thing that comes to my mind is like duty to a family.
Yes,
people don't like. I think you hear it a little bit. People say, "Oh, family is the most important thing that matters." And that's a really powerful idea that bonds to each other. But I think that you don't. And I said, at the risk of sounding like a communist, because it's what communist says, but they're not something they believe. But there's a reason that they have to attack like the family unit, because that is the number one way people actually care about each other and actually succeed in life. And you do have a duty to like your family unit. And I wish that was more talked about. I can't control it, but it's a really powerful thing. And we can go into like crime statistics and everything else, how likely you are to be a criminal if you don't have it. But it's like, at its very basic value, that is how society is built, and that's how it's ordered. And
well, we will get back.
I think it's an issue.
If it is true that history operates in cycles or in patterns or it rhymes, we will get back to a time where it is the cultural milieu to have a focus on the family and a family-centric outcome. The question is, will it be the harder but gooder, I know that's bad grammar, the harder but gooder path of doing it willingly by ourselves, voluntarily engaging in it and choosing to, or is it going to be rebuilt by somebody else later, like after everything goes to hell? And I think that's a legitimate question, to be like, the solution is the same in both outcomes. But the method of getting there is different. Are you going to wait for the collapse to finally grow up and be a man? Or are you going to do it now and go through the hard, grueling process of correcting yourself and figuring it out and working and being a culture and working it out? It's the same thing that extrapolated outwards applies to gun culture. We're either going to congeal around things that we believe are true and engage in philosophy, or our best ideas are going to be determined by the least of us and we'll give up rights continuously.
I think that's name a second.
Or we'll self-infringe on rights. So
I think there's two questions that kind of poses.
Okay, go ahead.
The first one is like, what is a man? And it could be anyone responsible, but I think particularly manliness. And I think it's something like somebody who takes care of their responsibilities in business. That's what being a man. That's what it says to be a man. That's what they're really telling you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the second half of it is in gun culture specifically. Like you mentioned the maturity of it and growing up. Maybe I'm wrong. Like I don't have any data, but I feel like there are less posts about gun bunnies these days than there used to be. Right?
It's certainly not the trend anymore. Thank goodness.
And thank goodness for that. And I think I think that was an example of being led by something that wasn't matured, it wasn't really developed. We wanted to, instead of looking at like the concept of being responsibly armed, everyone's like, oh, we'll just throw in like something that's fun and licentious that people really enjoy, and it doesn't last. But it's more than just a trend. The reason that's changed is because of 2020. I think when you saw everyone people started buying guns en masse, and you had the giant, gun sales of 2020. It wasn't about getting part of the culture and being on Instagram and looking at the memes. And I think like I used to be part of all that and stuff. And then it started to change to like, I'm worried about my family. That was what most people were worried about. And it doesn't mean that it's that simple, or that was always the right issue, or they were in the right, or they did the right things. But that was a big shift. And it took a couple of years for it to really change when you watch it. But people are worried about stuff. When you actually worry about something, like you have to grow up. You have to grow up a little bit. And I think that's one thing that propelled it to grow up a little bit. And I think part of the whole black pill thing comes out of that though, because there are the people who are like, oh man, it used to be so much fun. And now it's like much more depressing, or that's one way to take it. I don't know if it's necessarily true. I think one thing I told you a couple years ago, I still hold by it, was that 2017 to 2019 will kind of be considered like, for a while, at least, the golden age of firearms. Like it was like this revolution. They had all kinds of new kit coming out, new guns, it was a really big proliferation of this culture, but it was still not that serious. And then the tone is very different nowadays, and you're seeing crime rise and stuff,
Yeah, so I kind of stepped out of gun culture for 17 to 19. So yeah, right around that whole time, which is interesting because like that's when a lot of what's going on now kind of rose up again. I do think that like the whole gun bunny thing was a phase. Like it always comes and goes. To be honest, it's this kind of like it comes and goes, and it has its little clicks and whatever. But it certainly isn't like. It isn't the de rigueur anymore. It is not the like, oh, we know how this is going to be. And to be clear on that, I am thankful, because it's just like, we'll let it go, as in like, it never delivered. It was always just kind of like, okay, Matt Best did an excellent job being funny about it. But like, people remember Matt Best, and he's still around. He's not like he's dead or anything, but it's like he was very on the nose with his humor, especially for the time. He's very much like, this is funny. He's got his things going on, his bikini snaps and blah, blah, blah. And it's funny. But like, if we were still doing that now, it'll be like, it's a little old hat. It's a little like, okay, now.
I also think in the issue of like, I don't know if it's true of all of them, but on Matt Best, an interesting one, because I don't know if you're ever going to hear this, Matt, but I met Matt in 2019, and I was not a fan. And in person, he was extremely cool. And it was like, okay, so a lot of that was like a persona, and that's probably why a lot of it burned away, was because it was never. I could be wrong for everything else, but it does. In hindsight, it's kind of like, it was never that to begin with. It just became something tongue in cheek for the Instagrams, and it's like, that's not permanent. Permanent of that.
I've met Matt too. I need to sit down and have another conversation, because I'd love to hear his perspective on how because like they've done what they've done, right? There's always drama and controversy to be had about anyone who's been successful, and we can live and die and become the gun version of TMZ, but that's not going to happen today. Rather, I think something that I have been seeing a lot more in the last, I'm going to say 2 years, is that there's been a much more forward heavy side to gun culture, talking about faith and beliefs. And like, it used to be this idea of like, when I was in Ranger Battalion, Christians were looked at as suspect because they might not be able to like perform. And I lived a very for a while I lived a life of like very dualistic. I had my like Ranger me and then my Christian me, and they had to try to live in the same body, and they fought against each other inside of Use Two Wolves, one with a tan beret and one with conscience.
No, it's the Christian flag with like the white flag and like the red cross with blue.
Yeah. So like, but like my point being said is like, I've seen a lot more of that change now, where like now you have John Lovell, you have Nathan Spearing, you have a lot of this like
Penny.
Eddie. I've not listened to enough of Eddie Penny.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly changing, and I think that like the why of it though. I think the why of it's interesting. There is this revolution that's happening, and going back to the whole black pill question, I don't think it's fake by any means, but I think part of it is because things are worse than they seem, and that's not to be pessimistic, but things are breaking down a little bit. And one thing that really, like you talk about other podcasts, one thing that really struck me was listening to, I think it was Garand Thumb on the Bridge podcast with Travis Haley, who mentioned Craig Sawyer and looking at human trafficking. And Craig Sawyer is very outspoken about his beliefs and everything else in human trafficking. And it's like, it seems to have really affected Travis Haley because it's dark. And things are dark right now. And maybe and there's a lot of bad news in the world. I think a commentator recently said something that it was like, man, we have more news in a week of a news cycle now than we did during the entire Clinton administration. And it's like, in some ways, yeah. And
we have more noise. We have so much more noise.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's more noise, but there's also more stuff going on. I remember how that big O.J. Simpson trial was, and it's like, is that really news? Not really compared to everything else. That would be like a cliff note in today's news cycle, because
probably
we have so many things going on right now. And it's not to say that the world's like not worth fighting for or depressing, but it's like it's a dark time, and that's okay. And we're seeing it.
Do you think that do you think when you say a dark time, are you saying that? Because I have a one element that would kind of, it's not an absolution, but it is a question. Is that like, are we entering a dark time, or do we just not have the convenience of low effort morality? Because like, for example, the Epstein thing, right? Like that's very, very like you cannot. The world is actively, everything that we have in the apparatus of our state is actively trying to keep that like as a meme, as a forgotten concept. It's minimized. It's always something else. And like, that's kind of a big deal. The Epstein issue is kind of a big deal when you're saying, oh yeah, well, the heads of government were involved in this human trafficking ring. And you're like, oof, or people of influence, like these characters of influence and power and whatever. And on the one hand, it breaks up how much I trust the institutions, which is a natural course. But on the other hand, I'm also reminded that like I don't have influence in that world, but I might. Maybe the world will change, because I wouldn't like, I didn't know.
I struggle with that. I don't know, because of the first thing that I think about is the reason that you're seeing this thing change is that a lot of people in our industry look at things like Epstein, and it's not just the institutions or something like that. This is a spiritual issue.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think that's like the so what of it is that it makes you realize like this is way bigger than people, way bigger than just like someone did something. As far as influence over, you see the culture now. I mean, I remember when I met you as a gunsmith. Like the year before that, we had a guy who was very involved in politics in here in Texas, and with the governor and stuff. And he was like convinced that the left wing was dead. And I was like, I don't know, man. I'm seeing it pretty weird. But I remember being very worried about looking at things like the big issue that went down nationally, but especially where I am in Texas was like gender neutral bathrooms.
Oh, okay,
And
yeah,
it
this
was
was during
like,
that time. Yep.
yeah, it was during that time, and I'm like, okay, like this is weird, like this is interesting, this is weird. Where's this going? And then it was like that was one issue, and then that issue was kind of resolved and done with a lot of businesses in a period of a couple months. Fine. Next year, the trans movement hits really hard, and you see everybody talking about it. And it's like, okay, this is taking over culture now. It is what it is. But the one thing I haven't touched is like no kids. And it was in 2021, you see the whole kid thing explode, and it was kind of already happening. But in a period, we're at 2023 now. In a period of less than 4 years, you see how this thing changes, and it's, to my knowledge, it's not something. I can't think of anything other than the potential of nuclear war during the Cold War years that the boomers had in their generation that was on par with this radical change. Like I can't think. Yeah, we had the revolutions in the 60s, and we had unrest, and you had some bombing and things like that. But we haven't seen it. Not to quote Joe Biden, but we haven't seen someone wrestle over the soul of a nation like this. And all that. It's very interesting, and so people are looking at it right now in a spiritual aspect, and that's why they see that there's like an oppression and darkness. And I think that's where people get really pessimistic or they get really optimistic. It's like one or the other. And it's like choose what matters to you and choose the way you view this whole thing.
Well, there was a time where you could get away with years of angst and discomfort over what you value and what you see as true and right and good, and that time has passed. We're no longer in the time of debates. We're in the time of courage, where you have incompatible or you have absolute incompatibilities. Like I think what we're trying to figure out right now is not what do we have in common anymore. I think that time has passed. I think really what we're trying to figure out is like, whose permission am I looking for? Maybe that's not the right word. I know it isn't, but I think of it as this way: is like I think I'm seeing it this way: is like you look at how like the ATF and the gun control thing is moving along, and the braces and the stocks and that kind of stuff like this. Maybe this is just where I'm at in the world right now, but culturally speaking, I think that culturally speaking, what I see the development in gun culture is that we're no longer interested in playing this game of like, oh, I'll convince you onto my side. It's just get out of the way. Stop. We're done. The debate is over. I
think there's that, but the problem is that it's hard even to get that voice out now because that's what censorship's about. That message is hard to get out, and I think like something I told you about and stuff that was a really big deal with me was in 2020 I was deployed in the military, and that's when the riots broke out, and I was not in law enforcement at the time, but right before, like a week before this happened, I found out that one of my good friends that I had seen a long time was shot and killed in line of duty. And it really affected me. And then you saw 2 weeks later, you see like the way that the cops are being painted. And I'm not a blue line guy who thinks all cops are good. Like there's some bad ones out there. And like I have a very different opinion than the average cop on that. But I think that was really interesting. And
thin blue line is FUD lore. It's not articulate enough.
It's not. But one thing I can say that is true is like, go to a city with 120,000 people and you got 13 cops on for a night. You're it. I mean, it's crazy. I've done things I never imagined I would have. But I think that was interesting for me to see, but also to see that it affected my cousins. It gripped them really well. They got really sucked into the whole narrative. My other cousin's a police chief in another state, and the hatred that came out of it for voicing like there's something wrong here and I want to put this fire out when I don't see the whole, I can't do anything right now, but it was really painful, I think, for me, and just kind of see it. And then it really changed a lot of things in me. Lost family members over it, but to see that happen, it made you say, like, at least for me anyway, that like, okay, this is dark and it's something different right now. and it's dividing people, and there's a spiritual element to it, and that's why you're seeing it. I think that what we're seeing right now is kind of a symptom of that time and the years after. It just took a while to catch up, and it changed the culture very much.
I think that everyone's waiting. Everyone's waiting for a catalyst event.
Yeah,
everyone's waiting for some catalytic event where like the thing will happen. And I think what I understand from you is we might want to start considering that already has. There is no catalytic event. We are in the dark time. Like now is the time where we have to like, you will rise up now or you will rise up never. And
maybe I'm not. And to clarify, I mean, I know that like given the caveat for everything else here, I'm not like advocating for people to go do stuff, but like
no,
things are crazy. Things are crazy, and no matter whether or not you want it, like
we need to take
something's going to happen. You got to get ready to defend what you love and like love your tribe because like love people because like things are getting dark.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see it as this one is that like imagine it as a relationship between a teacher and a student, and the student like the student and the teacher are different, have different views. Now you'd raise the question, why is the student learning under the teacher if they're like, they have opposing problems, but the teacher still has some sense of authority. And then as the student matures, we think, well, the student, supersedes the master or takes over the master's position, but rather the student being the American population is kind of waiting patiently for either the government to go away or to give them permission. And the issue is that like that permission time is no longer the case. It's not that this is not if you're reading this as some sort of hyper simplification of like, the Boogaloo joke, like that, go seriously consider like introspection is needed. Like you lack the moral character to engage in philosophical conversation. You need to go back to ABCs. Or you're deliberately trying to twist language and we know it and we don't care. But I'm saying like, it really does stand out in this sense of maybe we're in the dark time. Maybe the dark time is, okay, like no one is going to give you permission to do the right thing. And the right thing might be simply raise a family, get invested in your church, be a part of your community, go to your pastor and say, I don't think this is right. We should move this way. And like, find the courage, dude. And I see that as in my own mind is like, the 2023 is not the year of the intellect. It's the year of courage of like,
I agree.
We really need, like, we're not trying to understand it anymore. Now it's build your community and we'll do this together and we'll do this as gun culture will, but we're definitely in the mature years. And I was thinking even back to the way that we talk about like boomers and millennials, like millennials are the dominant generation. Choose what your legacy is going to be.
Yeah.
I don't, the legacy of the boomers is sort of settled. You had the end of the global war on terror. I'm sorry, not the end of the global war. You had the end of the Cold War. You had the roaring 90s and like the tech boom. And then you had the early 2000s, the global war on terror. And as they descended out, now we have all of our things that history is going to know us for. And that's just kind of the way of the world. So I
think that's exactly on the point about what we're going to do. Like, it's like leaving a legacy as a generation. But I also would throw a bit of a caveat in there. And that is that like, a message that we don't like saying because it makes us uncomfortable, but I think it's important, is that like on the side of us right now that are kind of facing, the people right now who are being labeled as the oppressors by the at least loud minority or majority, whichever one it is. We believe in God, and God does promise that He's a God of love, and like. It's very common now to say, like Christians are unloving, or that, it's not. It's almost makes it uncomfortable right now because like love is kind of defined as like this other really weird thing you hear, and on the woke side of it. And
love is love. Yeah, we know
it's been hijacked, and like true love actually cares about the natural order of things, cares about each other, and like cares about defending what's right, and that's an element that's godly, and that message sometimes isn't said, and we also a lot of times like in the warrior culture don't like saying it because it's kind of a weird thing to say, and we it's kind of treated really strangely because we're kind of taught to be hard.
What's the thing like? What's the thing that we're told not to say?
Just that we should be loving, and it's a weird thing to say. Like it's a weird thing in our culture. It's a weird thing in our culture to say right now is that like, I do definitely know people that I would agree with on political grounds. I'd agree with on like the way things should be, but I don't agree necessarily with their motives, because it should be about people. We the people is like a really big thing we say all the time right now, but it's like, well, do you care about the people you're with? Like you should. And like, so if you're going to do it right, like be loving, and that doesn't mean be weak, but it means be loving. And it's really important that message gets out. People have hijacked the definitions of love now to mean whatever it means. It's like, it's a vapid word. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Love is basically me reordering the world to whatever I want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would agree with that one. It's just like we can reinvest in character, and that's good.
Yeah.
It comes down to. Go ahead.
But I haven't heard. But at the same time, though, I mean, I know, particularly in officers, I know a lot of officers. We also know military guys that like they take pride in like how much they don't care, how hard they are, and things like that. And it's like
I've been that guy.
Not only is that, huh? Say again?
I've been that guy. No, like I definitely. Yeah. I had a very very much so like Billy Badass nihilistic phase of,
and I think, but I also think that it's interesting that those people don't usually perform the best because you usually like it's not a good way to perform either. And you got to level with yourself on those issues.
No, they never do. Like it's a complete no. I mean, it's not I've been that guy too. But nihilism, the that form of attitude is a topic for another time. I think we're gonna. I mean, I'm not.
There's a lot to it.
Well, it's. I will not. If I try to go through the full conversation now, I will lose. It will lose some of the weight. But I do know that from my personal experience, this idea of like the kind of not loner, but like the looking at the system and seeing it's all messed up. You know, like getting in the military or not being a part of the military and seeing like, oh, you meet your heroes and they're not who you thought they would be, and looking out in the world and kind of maturing and growing out of naivety into cynicism. Naivety gives way to cynicism. When you believe something for wrong reasons, you're naive, and we accept a certain amount of moral weight of innocence to someone being naive, but at some point in time that naivety becomes ignorance, and we may not have a line in the sand when that happens. But naivety gives way when naivety is faced with the reality of the world to cynicism, because something has to fill the void. You have a weak platform, a little structure made out of wood, and then it realizes that it's built on a foundation of sand, so it collapses. But what happens is that leaves a void, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and suddenly you've like perceive the entire world as if it's all a waste of time, and there is no morality, and everything is do whatever you want, and then whatever you want is not enough, and like the breakdown of your idols as you realize that their idols collapses before you, and that's just the way of it. If they were real, they wouldn't collapse, but your idols collapse before you, and then cynicism rushes to fill the void.
I think it's worth saying that that's really true, but it's also why it's so important to be grounded in things that are true and things that really do matter. Because it's like the whole Black Hawk Down quote: as soon as the first bullets go, like everything just goes out the window. You don't really care about it anymore. And I think
you do care.
Yeah, you do care, but I mean, like all the politics stuff like that. I think it's to quote Black Hawk Down's version of Norm Hooten. I think said that, but the But the one thing that I think of, like, kind of speaking of that, also goes back to the tactical maturity. The bravest thing I've ever seen somebody do was I had a call for a guy that was in a hotel room, and he had a gun to his head. He was suicidal, and we got on the phone with PD. And it's a long story, but the way that it came out, it was a pretty scary call. I think it was really, really scary. I mean, and so I was told, hey, you're going to be the lead officer on this. and you're going to go in and you're going to handle this. I'm like, all right, I'll do it. And I got a negotiator with me. But one of my friends who was a SWAT team member, very, very, very mature. In my mind, the guy's just like 10 feet tall. He's no longer a police officer, but we're getting ready to go into this door. And I got a master key to be able to key into the room. Works for all the doors. We made sure there's no one on the either side of the room, no one below or above. We cleared all background, knowing this is going to be crazy. And we're about ready to key in. And one thing he told me, he said, "Hey, if it's locked, every time that we blow a door here, the ceiling comes down on us." And I was like, "How many times have you blown a door in his hotel complex? That's a crazy idea." But he's like, "Yeah, multiple times." I'm like, "Okay." And I know this guy, and he was very much kind of the guy. He's like, "Yeah, we'll shoot him if we shoot him." And he's usually the guy you think is the hardest. He's always like, "We got to stand over here because if this a-hole decides to shoot us, we got to be okay, cool." But we went in, keyed in, and we met with this guy, and we did it anyway. And one thing he told me, he's like, "Hey, if I go down, just secure the scene and leave me until everything's ready." I'm like, "Okay, all right, man, it's cool." Scary, but we walked in and ended up being a really cool call, and it ended up being a really, really happy ending as far as like getting the guy down. We talked him down. It was really cool. I got the gun, disarmed it, and stuff. And at the end of this call, this dude is like suicidal. His wife is possibly leaving him, and he got caught in an affair. And this guy is just balling, and he's got all these problems. But I saw my friend actually empathize with him, like hug him. He got a little choked up, and he's like, "Man, I'm sorry, this sucks." And he's like, and it wasn't, and I knew it was genuine. It wasn't just like him saying it. And I think going from the hard warrior to seeing him be really nice with this guy who just needed some help and stuff, that was like, it really affected me. I think in my immaturity, it took a while for it to sink in, but I think.
All right, so finally, again, this is the longest show we've ever done, but your story of this officer who transitioned from mission focused tactical to like very personal, able to handle it and then go back to what had to be done is kind of setting the roots for.
Yeah. I mean, it's really popular to talk about empathy and everything else, but it was like true empathy to kind of see, like, going from I'm ready to get involved in officer involved shooting, like right off the bat, like no joke, we're preparing for it, and to being empathetic was a really important thing. And yeah, it took me a while to kind of understand that, but I value that more than I think I ever did.
Well,
yeah.
Well, hey, I know this is sort of like a little at the end, a bit like of a note and an outro, but you know, first of all, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a second subject that we started talking into, but you know, we can do this again sometime. So, but like, yeah, how do we do this? How do we say goodbye? Right. You know,
well,
like, I guess we're gonna close off because we'll talk to you soon. Because I mean, I don't know. Are you running like a social media thing? Is there if you wanted someone to not support you but support you, what would you say? Because like,
if you go onto Instagram and look up Modern Witcher, you should be able to find me.
All right. And are you discovering?
I'm friends with Redacted. If you go to Redacted, it'll show up that I follow and they follow me back. So
yeah,
I should be the only one there. But yeah, I mean, you can find me on Instagram, private account. DM me if you want to follow me, and
you can find me. Yeah.
No. DM me if you got it, and I'll add you. If hey, you're a person, you're not a bot, something. Yeah, it's cool. But,
sure. It's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Austin, it's actually really been great having you on the show. I think we should do this again sometime. And thank you for kind of going through it, like taking the term long form to an entire new level. We really, I think we in the beginning, we covered this your idea of like tactical maturity in the sense of like being a more complete operator, maybe. It's not really a more elite or more complete, but I appreciated that as far as we've seen. Just as kind of like as gun culture continues to grow, I think that's a useful contribution. And then going on from there, citizen response capabilities, and then we started talking a little bit about like culture and philosophy and a little bit more of an exploratory side. So, well, for those of you who have survived and have enjoyed this far in the podcast, I would really appreciate if you would decide to either share it with somebody. It's a bit of a time commitment, we know that, but listen to it in chunks if you have to. But we really appreciate you being here and going through the conversation with us. So if you guys like to support the channel, you can head over to redactedllc.com. That's probably how you found us anyway, but that's where our merch lineup is up. And then we're working on some other things. So we'll talk to you soon, and we will see you soon as well. Enjoy.
Thanks for having me, and support Redacted because it's awesome.
Oh, thanks, dude.
Yeah, man.